Okay, good morning. I'm Trina Wally. I'm the Executive Director for the East Stanislaus Resource Conservation District, and we've partnered with your Madera Chowchilla Resource Conservation District to bring workshops and various programs to Madera County. And I am going to cover some of those in my presentation. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my slides. So just a few highlights of what your Madera Chowchilla Resource Conservation District has in the works or currently going in Madera County. The Resource Conservation District is a organization that's your local representative, and so it is their job to be a resource to the landowners, farmers, ranchers, on anything that's resource concern related. So they've been working on a few community programs, water quality resources for residents, for example, river cleanup days, volunteer plantings for monarch habitat, and riparian restoration. But since Madera is a large agricultural county, of course, a lot of the programs are aimed at the agricultural side. So they have a cover crop program that they got started several years ago, and they are working on developing more trainings in the future regarding cover crops. Pollinator hedgerows and monarch habitat is a program also that they have recently been able to secure funding for to do more of. The staff is currently in training, and one of the partnerships that we've developed is to develop a mobile irrigation lab so that the RCD can provide irrigation evaluations and workshops on irrigation management. They've had an ag plastic recycling program, and then a lot of this presentation is going to be about this last one, and that's conservation planning. So a lot of the programs came about during the drought of 2014. There was a lot of questions around soil health and how our farmers and ranchers could do more to manage their waters and their soils. So around that same time is when the RCDs worked on consolidation so that they could bring together their boards and continue to offer more services to their farmers and ranchers. A lot of the programs, again, a lot of the funding that is available to resource conservation districts are really centered around drought resiliencies, resources for residents, and cover crop trainings. So the mission statement for the Madera Chowchilla Resource Conservation District is they're really working to become a go-to hub for natural resource conservation and agriculture on public and private lands in Madera County. And so Amy is doing a great job of bringing partners together to be able to provide services to your farmers and ranchers in Madera County. One of those services, in fact, I believe we're going out next week for an irrigation evaluation. That's one of the key tools in a mobile irrigation lab where we have staff that goes out and does a full evaluation on the irrigation system. Again, this ties back into the drought resiliency. Our program in Stanislaus County got started during the past drought, and there was a lot of requests for the evaluations. And this past year, we've seen another uptick in irrigation evaluations, again, all related to managing your water. So in these irrigation evaluations, we follow the Cal Poly ITRC distribution uniformity test. We've also looked into flow uniformity, irrigation scheduling, and the farmers get a full report with all documents. We go and we pull their soil reports and their soil holding capacity. We pull their specs for the equipment to make sure that they are using it to its fullest potential. And a big part of what we've seen is that maintenance is a key word in keeping those irrigation systems working. We've seen a lot of irrigation systems that have been brought back online this year with the decreased water allotments. And it's obvious that those systems have not been used in the past 2 to 3 years as a main way of irrigating. I'm sure they were flooding. And the operational side, the distribution uniformity of the systems from lack of maintenance over those few years really shows in the uniformity test. So conservation planning is the next step of what the Resource Conservation District wants to be able to add services to their farmers and ranchers. Conservation planning is really about the ones that have come to us in Stanislaus County. Really, it's been about providing a sustainability for their farms and ranches for the next generation. But a lot of the things that we do on the conservation planning side have other benefits. For example, market access. Maybe it's a processor requirement, a buyer's certification, something that's encouraging the farm or ranch to look towards conservation practices. One of the conservation planning that we do is carbon farm planning, which is looking at the carbon sequestration that you can do through various conservation practices on your farm and ranch. And that's really looking at future market access. So there's currently an ecosystem marketplace that's in development, as well as a carbon exchange. And having a carbon farm plan provides the opportunity for those farms and ranches to be ready for when those marketplaces come online to access additional funding for their farms. And of course, anything that's funding for farm improvements, whether it's infrastructure or increasing yields, a lot of those come through various programs such as CDFA's State Water and Energy Efficiency Program. That application just opened last week. And so if you have questions, various partners with the Madera Chowchilla RCD can provide technical assistance so that you can help secure funding to implement water and energy conservation practices. And that's funded by the CDFA Climate Smart Agriculture. The RCD has also secured monarch and pollinator habitat funding to do demonstration sites and training. So they're looking for sites to implementation of habitat, funding to implement pollinator hedgerows and cover crops. And those fundings come through various sources, Seed for Bees, Xerces Society, and CDFA Fish and Wildlife. And a lot of this is brought through our state association that pulls us all together so that we can get funding on the local level. The big part is our partnerships for the technical assistance, because I believe the Madera Chowchilla is a staff of one. So Amy really needs her partnerships to be able to bring all of these services to your local landowners as you guys build your capacity. So there's the CDFA sweep. There's also the Healthy Soils program that will be coming out soon. Again, Almond Board of California, the sustainability program helped fund this workshop, for example, Department of Water Resources and Department of Conservation. Through one of the main partners is the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, and that's really the conservation planning format that we follow at the RCD to assist our farmers and ranchers. So the conservation plans not only help with the other types of funding programs, but all of the various NRCS funding programs such as EQIP, Conservation Stewardship Program, Conservation Incentive Program, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And that's a big one that's here coming up for the San Joaquin Valley. There's 5 counties that are included in that. And these other funds, usually you have to compete on a statewide level. But with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, you're only competing with the 5 counties that are participating in that program. And so it's really going to be a benefit to our local landowners. And so with that, it was just a quick overview of the various programs and funding opportunities and what the Madera Chowchilla RCD is working on to provide to you guys. Stacy will be covering more on the Regional Conservation Partnership Program.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Amy, and everybody who organized this. My name is Stacy Schutz. I'm with American Farmland Trust, and I work in the Climate and Agriculture Program. And my colleague, Paul Lum, who's an agricultural specialist and a farmer, he was not able to make it today, but he's one of the other folks who are working pretty directly on this RCPP. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Conservation Collaborative and the RCPP. So the RCPP is a regional conservation partnership program with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's a 5-year award that includes technical assistance and financial assistance. And the foundation of this RCPP, the folks who are going to deliver the outcomes intended of the award, is the Conservation Collaborative, and that's the San Joaquin Valley Land and Water Conservation Collaborative. That's made up of 9 different partners listed here. And like Trina mentioned, from north to south, there's Stanislaus County, Merced, Madera, Fresno, and Tulare. And so there's an RCD in each of those. Each of those counties. We're still working in Tulare to kind of figure that situation out, but it'll be the scope of the geography will be those 5 counties. And then we have 2 technology partners that are assisting the technical assistance part, and 1 additional land trust in addition to American Farmland Trust. And so that's California Farmland Trust. And then of course, NRCS is a partner in this award. So the goals of the collaborative are to protect and steward ag land, and we can do that through, as Trina described, conservation practices and also conservation easements, and also land rental opportunities for farmers who are looking to transition or repurpose their ground. And then the other purpose is to increase the capacity of technical assistance providers like the partners at the RCDs. And then the third goal is to reach new and underserved farming communities throughout the Central Valley. So those 2 technology partners that I've mentioned are the Conservation Biology Institute in this first paragraph listed, and they have helped American Farmland Trust create a mapping tool that's a web-based mapping tool, and we can insert new layers and like modify different layers that are in there so that we can see where to prioritize land throughout the valley. So there's layers that include prime farmland, groundwater recharge. We can, include by crop type, things like that. And then the second partner is the Freshwater Trust, which has a platform called Basin Scout. And that even further helps us refine our understanding of parcels that would be cost effective with certain conservation practices. So that one will be specifically piloted in Madera County for this, for the funding that's available in the RCPP. These next 2 slides just go through the major deliverables of the RCPP. So these first 2 are related to conservation practices. And this is a lot of the meat of the deliverables. So we're going to be implementing about 23,000 acres of conservation practices. And so the RCDs and AFT, we all need to know who is out there and interested to implement conservation practices. And I'll share with you a list of the 12 practices that are prioritized. As many of you know, there's hundreds actually of conservation practices, but they've been narrowed down for this project to a list of 12. And then those will help generate too the conservation plans that we'll have with producers. They can understand based on their goals and their resource concerns and benefit their in terms of the concepts. Looking to place 2 to 4 farms under conservation easements, and that's voluntary and at the interest of the landowner to engage with a land trust to place a conservation easement on their property, which essentially through state and federal funding can provide them with about 30 to 40% of the value of their land in exchange for essentially the development rights and the protection of their property as ag land in perpetuity. And then we'll also be identifying 10 additional locations where there's high groundwater recharge potential that would be very suitable for agricultural conservation easements. So again, this slide just goes through the conservation practices and the conservation easements. This next one, I had mentioned the land rental opportunities. And so there is financial assistance that will support 700 acres of land rentals. And it's very interesting talking with different groups throughout the valley. I realized how small this number can look compared to the acreage that may need this kind of support, but it is nonetheless there, and will support those voluntary and interested farmers who are looking to repurpose parts or whole of their land. And then these last three are more related to outreach. So 3 economic, social, and case studies on the adoption of those conservation practices, in hopes that is one mechanism that some producers may be more willing or interested to adopt conservation practices by seeing the economic value or the social value. And then we'll work on 3 to 4 workshops with partners and with producers in the Valley. And then this last one mentions, we will leverage some of American Farmland Trust's current programming on working with underserved farmers, which includes an underserved farmer outreach program, and very specifically a Women for the Land Learning Circle program. So those are, in a quick nutshell, the deliverables of the RCPP. And, Trina mentioned really well what the conservation plan is intended to do. And so this will be a first step to meet with producers who are interested to engage and go to their land, visit, and see what their goals and their resource concerns are. There's no obligation to proceed with EQIP funding, but it is, it is the intention for these to lead to those the implementation of those conservation practices. And so these next 2 slides go over those conservation practices really briefly. You'll see a few related to cover cropping, critical area planning, conservation cover. You'll see a few related to till, so no till, reduced till. And then we have one for irrigation, water, and wildlife habitat management. And of course, these vary by county and by location, what are most or should be most prioritized. And of course, they also vary by farm. So we recognize that. And then these last few are related to conveyance and the 2 new practices, on-farm recharge and groundwater recharge basins. And so the 3 before that, the irrigation pipeline, pumping plant, and structure for water control, are those conveyance mechanisms that can support those new practices, the recharge. So these are the 12 practices that we're looking to provide technical assistance and financial assistance for. And the RCDs and AFT will be those facilitators working with landowners to get these practices in place, and then very closely as well with NRCS and the DCs to have that follow through and to have those applications for EQIP go through. And as Trina mentioned, there is this financial assistance we keep talking about. There's a specific pot of money set aside through the RCPP for this 5-county region. So that helps in terms of the competition, which, depending on which location folks are in, about 1 in 3 of these applications, get approved for the funding, something in that range. But nonetheless, it can help. And so this is my contact info. As I said, Paul Lum, who couldn't be here today, he's another point of contact at American Farmland Trust. And of course, if you're a producer, in one of these counties, you have your RCDs to reach out to as well. So more than happy to speak with folks and answer any questions at this time. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone here and everyone on the webinar, as well as those that will be watching the video. As Trina said, I'm Jeff Borum, Soil Health Coordinator and Ag Programs Manager for East RCD. I think I just got to 6 years, very exciting. Just going to talk a little bit about improving ability to sink water and just some of the conservation practices that we focus upon, and that we do some research and coordinate research on. That's, I do a good amount of presenting, but a good portion of my time, probably over half, is done coordinating research with the universities, farmers, and others, on working lands. And so talk a little bit about that and how that can affect y'all, or as producers or providers, PCAs, CCAs, etc. And the clicker. Not very good with this. Click right? Anyway. I believe it's my fault.
Alright, we'll go to that
Can you click through? I'm like, I can keep talking. No doubt about that. Yeah. Magic. Wait, go back one. Go back. Killed it. Awesome. Oh, maybe it's working. All right, really quickly, this is just a quick cognitive map of where we're going. The basics, or what I talk about in foundational stuff, because I do run some compost field trials and things like that, and I go and talk about compost, and people are like, compost, so you just spread compost everywhere, you know, that's not going to fix everything. I'm like, yeah, no, one tool in the toolbox, right? Like, when we're doing compost out on rangelands, you want to think about grazing management first, those kind of basics. The other conservation practices, which I was talking about before, some of the on-farm and on-ranch trials that are going on working lands now, and that some of the things that are looking to happen, and then, yeah, places to get paid for those things, and who to link up with, where to look, and who you can connect with, and if we have any time, questions after that. I promise there's lots of pictures throughout this, but here's some words talking about the basics. When we go out and looking, especially, you know, orchards, row crops, what have you, anything that's irrigated, lands, like irrigation efficiency, as others will talk to you later in these presentations, is of the utmost importance. You know, just fixing leaks and things like that can be really big on irrigation water management. And then for us on the research side, and trying to promote some with farmers and ranchers, is the irrigation water management that I think Paul mentioned in the last presentation. And that through, like we're working through NRCS, and I think others are as well, getting soil moisture sensors out there, being able to have a user interface so you can look at your data kind of in fairly real time and check out what's going on, so that you can, you know, you're measuring something to manage it. You know, there's a direct cause there. As I talked about before, and as y'all know, I don't think, you know, might be preaching to the choir, and but grazing management, just when we're out doing compost, when we're out planting range plantings, like what have you, still like grazing management, you know, if you knock down the grasses down to where there's less than stubble, it's hard for it to bounce back. If you leave a little bit, usually it's a little better for it to bounce back, you know. But spreading compost when there's nothing there doesn't necessarily do anything. So trying to find the, you know, efficiency and effectiveness of these practices that we talk about, and I'll show some of them here. So here's some of the practices we talk about, and do need to remember that a lot of these practices are not necessarily new. And when I say not new, like cover croppings, first talked about in European history, and I think 683 BCE by the poet Virgil, and it's in Asian culture 10,000 plus years ago. And so, and a lot of these are indigenous practices from the Americas as well. That being said, we're trying to figure out how we dovetail these things in, or integrate them into our production systems today, right? And so we've done some field trials on cover cropping around the state, and again, another not a silver bullet. Like I'm a big promoter of it. I will go out in a couple days again and plant some more, but it doesn't work everywhere, right? Every farm and ranch is different, as y'all know. We worked in the far northeast, and it can get down to -13 there in the winter, and you got a short season because you got potatoes and onions, and so you're trying to plant stuff in November or December and hoping it lives, and it's tough up there, so it might not be worth it, you know. Anyways, a lot of these things, you know, I mentioned sinking water in the beginning, and then haven't talked too much about water, but we can pretty much link most all of these to not necessarily groundwater recharge, maybe some groundwater recharge, but also just keeping the water where your plants and where the production needs to be. And some of these are important ways. With cover cropping, you know, when there's infiltration issues, we might plant some daikon radish to break things up, break up the compaction. You know, which then increases infiltration often. Same with the compost application, you're adding organic matter, and so there's just, it can often make the soil a little spongier, especially at the top, and so that things help. Mulch application, natural air conditioner, especially out in our areas, is super important just for, natural air conditioner, not losing as much ET. And then for me, I work a lot on just not necessarily taking tillage away. A lot of orchard folks can do no-till pretty easily, especially if you're spraying the floors clean. But trying to reduce the tillage a little bit, just because often that can release the microbes into the air and get the sunshine, and then they burn up and they're not there and there's not as much life. And so I do often, maybe work in biomass and cover crops or work in some compost, but trying to not have as many passes. It also then helps with not as many passes, you're not, using as much fuel, so less costs on diesel. And then hedgerows for pollinators and beneficial insects along roadsides and things. Anyways, we coordinate research with quite a few folks. These are folks from UC Berkeley and UC Santa Barbara. We're working with Becca Riles in the Riles Agroecology Lab at UC Merced right now. We're co-PIs or principal investigators on our Conservation Innovation Grant through NRCS National, which is the soil health management systems on orchards in the Central Valley. And so taking a look at that, but all that to say, we work with all these people and we're trying to constantly still remember to measure to manage. So not just measuring things so it comes out in a paper for folks, not that I don't want them to have their papers and such, but how can it help us? So why are we doing these things? One, so that I can drive a mini excavator around and then dig pits, because that's fun for me. And then we can also look at bulk density and things. Part of it is actually getting out there with the people collaborating, right? And a lot of the positives I've seen are the cultural exchange that happens with ranchers and farmers, and then the researchers, and everybody's eating sandwiches in the dirt and it's dusty, and it's just, there's a camaraderie thing to it. And I think there is a big part to that, to us working together and keep some of these things going. These are some of the things we measure for. Soil carbon has been a big deal. It'll be hopefully a bigger deal when some of these carbon markets will pay a worthwhile dollar, not $5 to the ton or something like that. So let's see. So species composition is a big deal, but we like to look at things, compaction, infiltration. I talked about that natural air conditioner. I like to take people out on some of the compost field trials, and on one side where the compost is spread, I have them take their shoes off, right? And when you touch it, it's cooler than when you go over on the other side and it's warmer. And so that's something to remember, and it's something that's, fairly real and tangible. But a lot of these other things are important for a lot of other reasons. But again, we're looking at things often that matter to folks, to ranchers around the state, forage production, right? And part of this, again, you're spreading the compost, hoping that the water's sticking around a little more, and then being able to utilize it. The other reason that we do these research trials, and I don't have a picture here for that, I don't think, is we were helping NRCS to create an interim practice standard, and those practice standards are like kind of the ones Paul and Stacey listed up there. But this new one they were trying to put out, and we helped them do that through these trials, right? CPS 808, and that's soil carbon amendments, so that now around the nation, farmers and ranchers can get paid for putting compost on, or biochar, or some things like that. And so trying to do the trials, again, to help people measure to manage, but also kind of push the policy and get farmers and ranchers paid, and paid in more efficient ways. That's a big thing that we work with on our Conservation Innovation Grant. Again, just some of the takeaways there that were important to us, things like aggregate stability and compaction and infiltration. Nope, there's something. I see something. Oh well. So while they do that, we're running these conservation innovation grant trials. Oh, lovely. And that was part of them. Oh, maybe we can go back one. Yeah. This is us just again taking data in some orchards. This is important because right now we're doing some research with folks, but we're also now looking for 10 other farms each year to implement some of these things like cover cropping, irrigation water management, nutrient water management, composting or mulching, depending, and maybe reduction of tillage, hedgerows, and things like that. And we have funding for that. And whereas most things reimburse you, we are trying to pay for things on the front end. So instead of giving, you buying the seed and us reimbursing you as many of these ones do, we just buy the seed for you and ship it to you. And so we're just trying to show them that that's easier and simpler. And so that's a big part of our trials. Those are going on right now. We're looking for folks with around 100 acres or more in general, but feel free to contact us, and there'll be flyers that are up here as well for that. This is just something that we often do with folks I work with some of these practices. When I'm talking to folks, I just usually have a one pager with me of like some of the benefits, like why you would do cover cropping, but then where to get the equipment, possibly where to get seed. At the RCDs, we can't necessarily advocate for anyone specifically. Like I can say I've worked with Camprath Seeds and had really good experiences with them, but here are also like a couple others, right? And that's what I would say. And that's for me. For you, might be different. All good. And then some references if they're into like looking up their own stuff too. Okay, getting towards the end here, y'all. These are some of the programs, and I believe that Trina probably already touched on a couple of these. Paul and Stacy already touched on a couple of these, and then I've already talked about the top one there with the SIG Orchard trials. And for those of you in the room, this is what the flyer looks like that'll be up here. Also, again, of course, I talked about Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, quite a bit. I think Trina mentioned EQIP. There's also the Conservation Reserve Program, there's CRP, which can help you basically taking sensitive farm or ranch land out of production and planting some certain species and things like that. And then I believe you get a rental fee for those things, basically. And so those things are citing our SIG, our Conservation Innovation Grant, is through NRCS as well. CDFA right now, SWEEP for irrigation just came out yesterday, I think. And so that's there. If you're an irrigation person too, that one's pretty solid because you usually can try and help fill it out for your farmers and producers or farmers and ranchers, and they'll usually use you, right? And so it's a win-win situation, and SWEEP's been pretty solid, and glad they have some funding for that. Also right now on their demos and their incentive, it's like $10.32 or $10.34 per linear foot of planting hedgerows, and that's a pretty good deal, even if you got to bring a little water out to them. Right 100 is new. They're kind of pushing nationally. They're looking for $100. They're trying to push, looking for carbon practices being done, these conservation practices, right? And they're pushing to give farmers and ranchers $100 an acre or $100 an animal unit. That's kind of their, it's a political, like, make it easy. This is 100, but it's something to look for if it actually comes out. And then zero food print. Last week I was talking about this compost connector is something new, and they hadn't come out with, but I think yesterday also, or 2 days ago, it did come out. Zero food print. We've had some experience in Merced and Stanislaus working with the Gamperleys. They got a California Restore grant, and I'm doing some verification for that on them. That's for any of those practices we kind of talked about. You can put in for up to $25,000. For the compost connector, I think they will pay more. They're looking for you to put your name into a place, and they want you to look for the connection to your own compost. But if you can get the compost and you can get the analytics, they'll pay you for it. Now, they won't mess with the logistics or nothing, right? If it comes and it's weird or anything happens, they're hands off. They just want to pay, but they will pay for folks for it, and it's a direct, like here, they will pay the invoice. So there's nothing much you got to do. Possibly pay for part of the trucking or something like that, which is, trucking is often some of the most, but they are looking to pay for a chunk of that because they're mostly trying to push compost. Cool. References, that is it.
So we'll go next. All right, so we heard a lot about groundwater recharge, and that's really very interesting topic. As you know, we're dealing with the drought, and there are so many different things that we can do to address limited water supplies. One of them is to improve irrigation efficiency. So if you have an existing irrigation system, whether it's flood, drip irrigation, or sprinkler irrigation, if you improve the efficiency, you could be saving water and energy. We can look at deficit irrigation on certain crops, and we've done a lot of work on deficit irrigation on alfalfa, especially in the summertime. If you don't have enough water, you could skip a few irrigations in summertime. You can look at new cropping systems that use less water, for example, sunflower, olives, and so on. Other practices taking land out of production. This is very common down in Southern California, where, Imperial Valley and Palo Verde area. Or we can look at irrigation management, how we can improve our, the way we manage the irrigation, so we can end up with improving water savings. Next slide, please. Okay. So what do we mean by irrigation management? Three different components: applying the right amount of water to meet the crop water requirements. It's like, how many inches I need to apply in any given irrigation. And that depends on the irrigation system that we have. How often we need to irrigate? Do I need to irrigate once a week? If I have drip irrigation twice a week, or 3 times a week, or 6 times a week. And that depends on the crop, the irrigation system, and the soil type that I have. And we heard a lot about the distribution uniformity, making sure that our irrigation system is very efficient. So I could get brand new drip irrigation system with efficiency of, how much do you think the efficiency of brand new irrigation system?
90 plus.
90, okay, 90%, 95%. Okay, a year from now or 2 years from now, do you think that efficiency would be the same? Most likely it will go down, and you want to do at least distribution uniformity testing maybe once a year to make sure that things are going fine. Next slide, please. Okay, so irrigation scheduling. There are several ways where you can look at irrigation scheduling. Let me give you an idea. A very simple question. How long does it take to drive from here to San Francisco? Just an estimate, guesstimate.
2 hours and 20 minutes.
2 hours and 20 minutes. Any other answers?
3
2 and a half, 3 hours? Okay.
With the traffic.
All right, so if you have the traffic, 3 hours, all right? So the 2.5 or 3 hours, that's a really good start, because you're making this based on very simple fact. You know that the distance from here to San Francisco is about what, 140, 150 miles. On average, I'm going to go anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70, depending on the traffic. So we can go with that simple approach and do irrigation management based on that simple fact, knowing just basically what's the weather conditions that we have here. And from that, we can make a good estimate. Now we can go to the next step, all right? So the first one is looking at ET, reference evapotranspiration. I'm sure all of you heard of CIMIS, the California Irrigation Management Information System. So my CIMIS would be the 2.5, 3 hours, okay? So if I can look at CIMIS, I can just get a number right away from, from the radio or from newspaper or from the internet. I can find out what's the average evapotranspiration right now. And I can start with this, and this is a good estimate to start with. Now I can go to the next step, soil moisture. And soil moisture will give me, more flexibility in deciding, well, it's gonna take me 3 hours or 3.5 hours because of the traffic. Now, the soil moisture is the same thing. It's just gonna give me one more piece of information that will help me out making the right decision. Then I want to go to the extra step. I can look at the plant and ask the plant, is it stressed or not? And there are so many different ways. You're all familiar with stem water potential. I can use infrared thermometer and measure the temperature of the plant. How many of you have grapes? Do we have grape growers? Okay. So what's a simple way to see if the grape is stressed?
Tendril leaf.
Okay, great. I can touch the grape leaf and get an idea, with the experience, we can say, okay, well, the plant is stressed, or I can use infrared thermometer and compare it to the air temperature. If the plant temperature is lower than the air temperature, that's a good indication that the plant is not stressed. If the temperature is higher, that's a good indication that the plant is stressed. And the best thing to do is a combination of the above three, so you can get, the accurate information. Right now, especially over the last 10, 15 years, we have plenty of technology available to help us fine-tuning, the 2.5 or 3 hour time that will take us to San Francisco. Next, please. So we'll be talking about these technologies. Now, in general, a lot of us, we're used to flood irrigation systems. If you go back to the 90s and the 80s, we used to have, a lot of flood irrigation systems. We still have them on field crops, but as we know, as we go to tree crops, we're switching more into drip irrigation. So in general, when you're looking at the different irrigation systems, with flood irrigation, we're applying a lot of water. Could be anywhere from 3 to 4. If we have light sandy soil, we may apply 8, 9, 10 inches. If we have sprinkler irrigation system, we're applying less, okay, maybe an inch and a half. If we have drip irrigation, we're applying even less. And typically, I would say anywhere from half an inch to an inch per irrigation event. Next slide, please. All right, so when you look at soil moisture, there are so many different definitions, like MAD, management allowable depletion, soil water holding capacity, threshold. I wouldn't worry about, understanding all these terms. Like, let's say, if I take a foot of the soil from my field, imagine, you're taking a foot of that soil from your field. The soil is completely saturated after a flood irrigation event. Now, and I extract all the moisture out of it. How many inches do you think I can get out of that foot? In general, about maybe 6 inches, right? So if I can extract all that moisture by heat, like, in an oven, I will get 6 inches. Out of that 6 inches, that is not available to the plant. Maybe about half of it is available. So out of those 6 inches, I have 3 inches available. And now it depends on what soil type I have and what crop I have. So out of these 3 inches, if I'm growing vegetables or strawberry, maybe I only have 1 inch available. If I'm growing alfalfa, maybe I have 2 inches or 3 inches available. So keeping this in mind, and that's basically what we look at when we look at soil moisture. So a reading that I have on grapes, it's going to be completely different than a reading that I have on alfalfa, depending on the crop and depending on the soil type. Next slide, please. Okay, so the best thing to do is get to know your soil. And there are so many, in the old times, we used to have those maps, LRCS maps. We can go take a look, and the map will tell me, okay, I have, soil type 114 here, for example, low. And from there, I can take a look at that soil type and get more information about it. What's the water holding capacity? What's, if I have this soil type, how many inches are available for my crop? So most likely, 1 inch is available from every foot of soil. So if I have a vegetable crop and I'm going only 18 inches, I want to do the irrigation whenever I have a depletion of about 1.5 or 2. If I have alfalfa, my root zone would be 4 feet. If I have almond, my root zone could be 4 feet. If I have flood irrigation, could be the effective root zone could be 2 feet if I have drip irrigation. And again, depends on the soil type. So the first step is to go and take a look and understand what soil type you have. Next slide, please. Okay, so when it comes to soil type, typically we look at sand, silt, clay. We look at the percentage of these 3 different soil particles and come up with a soil texture. Okay, and there are so many soil texture, types, but I like it to keep it simple, and you can look at soils on the heavy side, like clay soils, loamy soils, and on the light side, like sandy soils, and something in between. So on the heavy side, we have soils like with high water holding capacity, and we heard a lot about groundwater recharge. So those soils, they have high water holding capacity, they hold a lot of moisture, but when it comes to infiltration rate, how fast the water moves through the ground, those are relatively low, and those are not great for groundwater recharge. Now, if you look at the medium type, loamy, silty loam, those are the great soil where we have medium water holding capacity, they hold enough moisture for the crop. And also they have good infiltration rate, not too great, but good infiltration rate that allow me to do groundwater recharge. And then we have, the lighter side where we have low water holding capacity. If I have a foot of sand and it's saturated, I can extract 6 inches. But if I have a mesh underneath with the gravity, most of that moisture will go down. So my water holding capacity is very little for the plant, but my infiltration rate would be great for groundwater recharge. So keep this in mind and get to know your soil. Next slide, please. There are plenty of resources. The one that I like most is the web soil survey from USDA. You can click, you can Google web soil survey, and it's relatively easy. Within a few minutes, you'll get a map. Next slide, please. All right, so we talked about soil moisture, and soil moisture, these are example of, soil moisture sensors. There are so many on the market. It's like, if you want to buy a car, we have so many options. Same thing for soil moisture. There are so many options on the market, and we can, if you have a question, we can help you with that. But in general, we're looking at the soil profile. Okay, what is my root zone? If my root zone is 4 feet, most of the uptake is from the top 2 feet. So typically we say 40% of the uptake from the first foot, 30% from the second foot. But when I look at soil moisture, I want to look at the entire soil profile. Well, one good reason for that is I want to look at the 4 foot depth and what's going on there. If the soil is wet all the time, it means I'm over irrigating. Okay, so this is a good indication for over irrigation. If the soil is relatively medium moisture, that I'm doing a good job. Next slide, please. All right, so how do we irrigate? We need to know what's the crop water use. Crop water use is typically estimated from the reference evapotranspiration, which is like a grass and stressed grass, like in your front yard, backyard. How much that grass is used is basically what we call reference evapotranspiration. And from there, like if my grass, summertime is using 1/4 inch a day, that's unstressed grass. I can relate this one to my crop. So if I have almond and we're in March or April, my almond crop may be using about 30 or 40% of what the grass is using. In summertime, that almond crop may be using 100% or maybe 110 or 120% of what the grass is doing. So I can relate everything to the reference evapotranspiration by what we call a crop coefficient. Next slide, please. Yeah, we can. Yeah, so what we call is a crop coefficient. So I can use the reference evapotranspiration as my, 2.5, 3 hour distance, time to San Francisco, and then I do a fraction. Like, if I want to go to a city halfway between here and San Francisco, it would be a fraction of the distance to San Francisco. So how do we measure the crop coefficient? Basically, we take the reference evapotranspiration, which is available from DWR, and multiply it by the crop coefficient, we get our crop water use. The next slide, please. CEMES has so many stations over the state. There are over 150. In the old days, they used to have this map, and this is a good start. The map has 18 different zones, and I can just look at my city here. Okay, it looks like Madeira, we're in zone 12. Next slide, please. Okay, and I can look at zone 12, and it will give me, what's the average ET on a monthly basis. I can just divide it by 30. In this example, in May, ETO is about 7 inches divided by 30. I get about 2/10 of an inch a day. So this is a good start. ETO in Madeira in May is about 2/10 of an inch. Good enough, right? Okay, next slide. Now, this is in the old days. Now we have a lot more technology. We use satellite. I don't have to worry about which station I'm going to go. I can go to a map and click on my field. Next slide, please. Okay, and I can click on my location and get the reference evapotranspiration of yesterday. And that is really good. It's free and available to everybody. This is just an example. I want to show you how much variation we have, even though we said in May, our average evapotranspiration is about 2/10 of an inch. This is from 2 years ago. You can see from one day to another. This is relatively cool day. The next day is warmer, and the third day is even warmer than the second one. Next slide, please. You can get this service from CEMES. You can just click on your location, just give them your email, and they can send you an email every Monday. And every Monday, I will give you the actual evapotranspiration at your farm for the previous week. Next slide, please. All right. So this is an example where you could see the variation. The traffic between here and San Francisco. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's not. You can see within 1 week, we said in May, our ETO here is about 2/10 of an inch. You could see in some days we got 1/10 of an inch, and in other days we got 0.25 inches. So you could see about 50% variability within even 1 week. And this is very important, especially if you have drip irrigation. If you have flood irrigation, you have plenty of room to adjust. But if you have drip irrigation, the system is designed for a maximum application for like 18 hours or 20 hours. And if you get behind, even if you run the system all the time, you're not going to be able to catch up. Next slide, please. So the crop coefficient accounts for the variability that we have in our crop. It depends on the crop itself. It depends on management practices. One of them is the irrigation system. And a good example here, if you have micro sprinklers and you're irrigating every day, the ground is wet. The crop may not be using very much water, but you have lots of evaporation going on. And the crop coefficient will take care of that. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is how we come up with the crop coefficient. We find a way where we can measure the actual water use of the crop with some of the scientific methods that I will discuss later, and divide it by the reference evapotranspiration that we get from CEMES. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, so the crop coefficient looks something like this. So for almond, it may start about 30% in March, may go to about 110 in June, July, and toward the end of the season, around this time, it's going to go down. Next slide, please. And this is example of how we determine crop coefficient, and I use in this example sunflower. So you see the red line is the reference evapotranspiration, the blue line is the actual crop water use. Next slide, please. And if I can, with this information, I can determine the crop coefficient. You see, variability, but the crop coefficient looks like this for sunflower. So we have crop coefficients for a lot of the major crops that we have in California. Next slide, please. And these are some of the scientific methods that we use to determine the actual crop water use. And right now we have lots of stations all over the state on a whole bunch of crops working with the commercial companies. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the new technologies. How many of you have heard of Thule technologies? All right, so Thule technologies is one of these sophisticated surface renewal. It's a method called surface renewal. It was developed by this company, started by one of the graduate students from Davis, Tom Champion. He got his degree from Davis about 10 years ago, and then he saw like, you need a station, we need to spend about $10,000–$15,000 to get the surface renewal system. And in order to get the data and analyze it and everything, you need to have, a degree and know how to download data, how to process data, how to do quality assurance. So he came up with a company and basically looking at the temperature sensor that measuring air temperature so many times a second. And from there, you can determine actual crop coefficient. So this is a Thule system. It's been on the market for about 6–7 years. So this is on alfalfa. You could use it. You can determine the actual crop water use. Forget about CMS, forget about crop coefficient. Now you're talking to the plant directly and plant telling you, okay, I used this much yesterday. There are other technologies, we can look at infrared temperature, and that will give us an indication whether the plant is stressed or not. Next slide, please. So this is infrared, on a small scale right here. Over there, this is another technology where you have a tower. You could scan about, a mile around your field and determine, the infrared temperature. And that will give you an idea about where you have stress and if you need to irrigate or not. Next slide, please. There is another technology called arable mark, and basically it's a sensor that measures, takes a whole bunch of measurements, about 40 of them. And one of these measurements would be the crop coefficient, temperature of the air, temperature of the crop, solar radiation, and a whole bunch of them. So this technology is available right now, and this is also a good tool to tell you how the plant is doing. Next slide, please. Okay. And we've done some work on evaluating some of these technologies. So at Davis, we looked at the Thule and the most sophisticated method for measuring crop water use right now, which is the covariance method, where you have to spend about $15,000 and have somebody taking data all the time. And actually, that method is relatively good. I mean, within 5% of the state-of-the-art scientific method. So this is an indication that you can get somewhere with these new technologies. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do I determine my crop water use? I can use the reference evapotranspiration. I can use the crop coefficient and determine last week, and from there, based on my current irrigation system application rate, I can determine how many hours I'm gonna irrigate. I'm not gonna go through the calculations. This presentation will be available to you, later on. Next slide, please. And keep in mind, we always have to consider the irrigation efficiency. So in this case, if my application efficiency is 80%, I need to add additional water to make sure that I'm irrigating the entire field uniformly. And this is why it's important to do DU testing, because if the DU is relatively low, you're going to end up applying more water, more energy, and more money. All right. Next slide, please. And from there, you can, based on the application rate that you get from Dominic later on, you can determine how many hours that you need to irrigate. And let's examine, 3.8 hours or 4 hours. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a good example of other technologies based on remote sensing. Series images available where you can get an idea about where you have stress. You can look at the numbers, the colors here. Red is a stress, yellow is moderate stress, green and blue are, you're in great shape. Okay, this is a commercial almond field, about 70 acres. And you can look on April 10th, you look at the map, you see lots of red, right? Lots of red, lots of yellow, and a little bit of green and blue. Now, on early May 2nd, you could see that the field is doing really good. We don't have stress. May 14th, the same thing, the field is doing great. We can also, stress could be related to, most of the time it's related to moisture, but if we have salinity, we need to consider salinity. So this is an example where we can scan, for salinity. Next slide, please. Okay, you remember the crop coefficients and the ETO and all that stuff. If you want to skip it, you can go to the Fresno Cooperative Extension Office, sign up for this newsletter, and make a number. The crop advisor will send you an email on Friday, and that email will contain something like this, where it tells you, okay, for this specific crop, you lost about 1.2 inches last week. And from there, how much you need to irrigate. Even, you can look at how many gallons you lost per each tree. And from there, you can determine, how many hours you need to run the system. Next slide, please. And here, I'm just giving you an example. So from that report that you get from the Fresno office, the ETC for your crop, last week was 1.06. Okay, application efficiency or distribution uniformity is 85%. So my irrigation requirement will be 1.06 divided by 85%, and that's an inch and a quarter of an inch. Okay, go ahead, sir.
DU is 85%, and your drip irrigating, which is say 90%. Do you factor that efficiency in your calculation?
Well, yes, yeah.
1.25
Yes.
divided by 0.9.
No. You factor it. You have the 1.06. That's the actual crop water use. If your DU is 90%, you take the 1.06 divided by 90%, and you're going to end up with a number less than 1.25. And this is really important why you need to do DU. If your DU is 50% and your ETC is 1 divided by 50, you need to apply 2 inches. That's money lost, energy lost. All right, so this is why it's important.
We have DU and we have the efficiency of the irrigation system.
They're the same.
They're the same.
Yeah, they're the same.
Okay, so you don't have to divide the efficiency of your drip system. That's incorporated in DU.
Yes. Yeah. So in general, for drip irrigation, it's the DU. For other irrigation system, it's application efficiency. So I use the big term application efficiency as the efficiency of systems. But for drip irrigation system, you need to worry only about DU. So just divide by DU. Okay, I have to look at rainfall. Did I get rainfall over the last 7 days? If the answer is no, then it's 0. If I got half an inch last week and I need to apply 1.25 inch, well, that half an inch most likely is beneficial use, and I will subtract it from the 1.25. Okay, if I got an inch and a half, I don't need to irrigate because my crop lost only 1.25 inches, including efficiency. From there, I can determine, how many hours I need to irrigate. 1.25 inches per week, and when I have the drip irrigation system, they tell me what's my application rate. So in this case, the application rate is about 1/10 of an inch per hour. All right. When you do the DU testing, they give you this number. Okay. Your flow meter also can give you this number by just doing very simple calculation. So in this case, I need to irrigate for 14 hours. Okay. I need to irrigate for 14 hours based on my, based on the ET of last week. I could, how do I, I could run the system for 1 day, 14 hours a day, 14 hours 1 time a week, or I could split into different irrigations. I could do, if I do like, 2 irrigations a week, I'll do 7 hours and 7 hours. If I have a sandy soil, I want to have more frequent process. Next slide, please.
May I ask a question?
Sure, sir.
So, and I may have missed it, but so precipitation is accounted for here. Is temperature accounted for? So
No.
the heat of the summer?
ETO will capture all the weather factors: temperature, solar radiation, cloud coverage, wind, humidity. Everything is lump sum in ETO. ETO is basically how much energy that you have available to evaporate and transpirate water.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't need to worry about temperature. Well, there is another way to look, from the publications from, the extension office. It may tell me, okay, you need to do 296 gallons per tree. I can just multiply how many trees I have per acre times the number of acres, and that will give me how many gallons. This is also another simple one. So 650 gallons, 650,000 gallons. I need to know what's my application, what's my flow meter reading. Okay, flow meter reading is really important. It's like, that it's like a watch, the time right now is 10:30. My watch will tell me the exact amount. So it's important to have a flow meter. The flow meter design, like here, it's 800 gallons per minute. I can just divide the 650,000 by 800, and it will give me, 13.6 hours to irrigate. All right. Another important thing for having flow meter, if my design shows that my flow meter should be running at 800 gallons per minute, what do you think if I go and take a look at the flow meter, and the flow meter is reading 900, 950, what's going on? Well, my design from Dominic is 800, and now, but my flow meter is showing 950. It means I have a leak somewhere, right? So this is a good indication that I need to go and walk the field and see where I have the leak, all right? So if my design rate is 800 gallons per minute, and I look at my flow meter and it's showing 600. Well, it's the other way around. It means like I have emitters that they are plugged and I may need to replace them or clean them. So this is a good reason to have flow meter.
Function of pressure, though, your pressure changes, it doesn't change.
That's
Then
good.
you don't have a leak and you don't have plugged emitters. You just have a well
That's a
that's
great
dropping.
debate. That's another scenario where you don't have enough pressure and the flow meter is going down. So there are different ways different reasons for the flow meter to go down. Yeah, great comment. The next slide, please. Okay, you remember all these calculations with the two-lead system. Forget about the calculations. I can just look at my two-lead system. This is the two-lead system on Almond and Hanford. It tells me what's my soil water holding capacity. I can just put the emitter spacing, the flow rate parameter and everything. Next slide, please. And they will tell me, okay, your application rate is about 1/10 of an inch per hour. Next slide, please. And they can give me for the last week on a daily basis. Next slide, please. And they tell me, okay, well, based on what happened last week, you need to irrigate for 10.5 hours. So forget about everything else. I can use this information. They do send you a weekly email on Monday with this information. You don't even have to log in. If you want to get more involved, you can log in and take a look at the crop coefficient and the other information that they have. They also tell you similar fields, your neighbors, what they're doing. They're irrigating about 20 hours. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is just an idea about, if you see this green bar right here, this is really good. This is for the same almond field that I showed you earlier. You can see if we're in this green zone, we're doing great. If my numbers are below, means the crop is stressed. If my numbers are higher, it means I'm applying more water. So this is good indication. They're giving me a window of, what I should have. Keep in mind, you look at, this is early April, and you could see stress right here. Okay, so from Thule I get stress. Next slide, please. From series images, I get the same thing. It's showing me that stress. I have stress in April, and then I can catch up and add more water. And you can see I went to the green and blue zones. Next slide, please. All right, so this is my alarm that I have only 5 minutes left. So we have the stem water potential. It's a great tool. There's no question. This is wonderful tool to give you an idea about stress in your field. Now, in order to do this, you have to go to the field. You have to be within 2-3 hours of solar noon. You have to have the instruments. So this is a great tool, but it takes time. If you have other tools that gives you the same information, that would be great. Next slide, please. Okay, there are other technologies on the market. There are dendrometers that they can tell you the shrinkage, the swelling in the tree, and indication of stress. I don't tell you how much water you need to apply, but they can give you an idea about stress. And if you need information about this, May Columber would be the best person. She has a lot of experience in this area. The soil moisture, that's also another tool that you could have. Now with the SWEET funding, all of these technologies we can get money for, and you can include them in your SWEET application. Next slide, please. Okay, just to summarize, if you're not doing anything right now, start with CEMIS, and that's the best thing, because CEMIS will give you an idea about what's going on, and then you can go to the next tools like soil moisture. If you can afford some of these technologies, that will make a big difference. We did not talk about salinity. If salinity is an issue, we have to consider it in irrigation management. So we have to do leaching, how often we have to do leaching, depending on the crop and the soil type we have and the irrigation system. And keep in mind, you're not only saving water, you're saving energy. And with the incentives for reduction in greenhouse gas emission, that's going to make a difference. And I think these programs will continue in the future for California. There are so many tools available right now to help you make the right decisions when it comes to irrigation schedule. Next slide, please, and that's concludes my talk. Questions? Right.
I'm gonna sound really dumb. But if my pump is pumping 400 gallons a minute on the field, and I want to just do a quick calculation of, you know, how much I'm gonna get for a 24-hour run,
Mhm.
I really wouldn't need DU to calculate that because I'm just, well, if my meter's accurate, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just calculating that way. So, how important is DU when you're just, you know, what your pumps are pumping? And that's what's going on in the field, other than you want to make sure irrigation is operating correctly.
What you're doing, okay, so let's say 400 gallons per minute, you multiply it by 60 by 24, that will give you, you know, how many gallons in 24 hours. You divide it by 326,000, and you're 326,000, you'll get how many inches, right? That's the average, okay? So that's the average application, all right? So if I have $1,000 and I have 50 growers here, you know, and I give them $1,000, on average, I give each grower $20, right? You know, 1,000 divided by 50 is what, 20, right? Okay, so on average, you know, $20, each grower got $20, but you don't know. I gave, you know, this gentleman 100, I gave you 5, I gave the next one 55. You don't know what's the distribution uniformity. You know on average what you're doing, but you have no idea about how efficient is your irrigation system. And this is why it's important to know what's going on in the field by having the DU test.
But it's only one test a year. It's not like it has to be that part of that calculation every time. It's just one time.
Well, in general, there are experts who are doing DU, but I would say, you know, for myself, I would do DU testing at least once a year. So I can identify if I have uniformity, if everybody is getting $20, that's the only way you will figure out if everybody is getting $20. When you do the DU for your farm, you'll find, you know, this tree is getting, you know, 21, the other tree is getting 18, 19. If you have 85, 90%, you're doing great. If you have 50%, you're not doing well.
The different systems you had here, from seamless to expensive ones.
Yeah.
Have you ever compared them for accuracy and cost? Actually, I guess the cost of the system. Because every time you buy a new system, it lasts for a few years and then something's going wrong.
Yeah.
So the simpler ones seem to be the longer lasting ones like Siemens. And have you ever compared those that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, Siemens is free, so you could utilize it. Thule technology is about $1,650 a year. It's a lease, and for sure it's going to be accurate because they take care of all the maintenance. If you buy a soil moisture sensor, you know, it may be accurate the first year. If you don't do your own maintenance on it, it will be no good maybe after 2-3 years. So it depends on the technology that you're using. But if you get the technology where you have a service fee and they take care of the maintenance, I would go for that.
Until the company sells.
No, I mean, you want to deal with, like, you know, I have from my own experience, you know, I've dealt with Thule. I have like maybe 20, 25 Thule systems all over the state, and they're really good. Arable Mark, I have a whole bunch of them. Soil moisture, I tried so many of them, and there are the advantages and disadvantages of each one. And, you know, if you're interested, we can talk privately about what you have and, you know, my recommendation. So I'll be more than happy to discuss that with you. Go ahead, sir.
I've worked with Thule too, and I think they're a good platform, you know, for irrigating because it gives you actual ECU in an area. But the only limitation is it covers, you know, a set amount of property, whether it's 40 acres or if you want to expand it 80 acres. And my challenge with using it was back in the day, I farmed a wine company and there's a lot more acres to cover. And so you know, my preferred method was like, I think, you know, the CMIS method with the Excel spreadsheet and the crop coefficient, because that can cover all your property
Yes,
for free,
yeah.
which is nice, but.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Open ET is coming up later on this year. It's going to be free. So you can go click on a map and look at actual ET. It's still in the development stage. There are satellites we were discussing earlier. There are methods where you can determine soil moisture from satellite images. Are they practical to use right now? No, but definitely in the future, after refining and everything would be great. We're working with a company, Land IQ in Sacramento. They have a lot of weather stations actually working with us, and they're coming up with actual ET for crops, not for irrigation scheduling, but for making management on a large scale. But one thing to keep in mind, the minute you know your field, from your experience, if I can look at some information from like Land IQ, and I know for my almond block of 40 acres last year, ETC was 45 inches. I can use this one for making irrigation decisions for next year. There's another thing that is available right now, forecast ET. And actually, if you're interested, we're doing a lot of work on forecast ET, where I can determine what's the ET for the next 7 days and making irrigation decisions. And actually, that's what we did on one of these fields. So lots of new technologies available.
And is there a simpler way of are crop coefficients available to us as growers that make a lot of sense, or is there? And I have a ranch. I want to know what the crop coefficient is on this. Is there a simple way that a farmer can measure that without using technology?
No, there's not a simple. You can get average crop coefficient for the crop, but you have to fine tune them for your needs. And I don't want to spend too much time, but I can, you could start with the average crop coefficient and look at soil moisture. If the moisture is indicating that it's too wet, means you're applying a little bit more. You can tweak it for next week and see how it works. So you can develop your own coefficients based on that. All right, thank you.
So today I'm going to be talking about, at first I'm going to be talking about soils and soil management, basically about investing in your soils as you would invest in new farm equipment, for example, or maintaining buildings or training up your farm staff. Then I'll be talking a little bit about nitrogen management and how to approximate some nitrogen inputs and outputs in your nitrogen management plans. And I'm just, I'm broadcasting from up here in Davis, California. And I'm pretty excited because we're predicted to get between 3 and 4 inches of rain in the next few days. And it rained last night. It's nice to see some water falling from the sky. It's just, I don't think I've ever been as excited to see rain. And because woodlands, normally, I live in Woodland, work in Davis, and normal precipitation here is about 18 inches. Last year, we got just over 4. So anyway, that's good news. Just wanted to say a few words about NCAT. There we go. NCAT is a 501c3 nonprofit. We have several offices scattered around the country. Our biggest project is something called the ATRA project. It's a National Sustainable Ag Information Service. This is the website. ATRA is a really good resource for farmers and farms. We have run a couple toll-free lines, one in English, one in Spanish. You can talk to a live person with any question related to organic or sustainable production or marketing of crops and livestock. At least half our staff are farmers or former farmers, and we all have long experience in organic and sustainable agriculture. The website has hundreds of resources on a wide range of topics in formats, however you want to digest information. We have publications, podcasts, videos, webinars, searchable databases, and blogs as well. And it's especially helpful for beginning farmers or farmers of all experiences. Might help you to avoid some big mistakes. You know, and I really appreciate what Dr. Bali presented about. I always learn something from these presentations, and I'm glad Jeff came back. And I didn't realize NRCS had a cost share about adding essentially calcium to your soils. That apparently that's a new cost share. And I'm registered as a technical service provider with NRCS in California, Nevada. So anyway, now what Dr. Bali and other presenters today are talking about is very important. Like irrigation water volumes need monitoring. Irrigation systems need to be maintained for effective use of our water resource and to be efficient in applying what looks to be an increasingly scarce resource. So the drip irrigation, subsurface, micro sprinklers, soil moisture monitoring is critically important. And looking at evapotranspiration, those are all part of the toolbox that we can use to more efficiently use this water resource. But you know, if your soils are not in good shape, the soil surface where kind of the rubber meets the road, right? Where the water either infiltrates or not. If you're not allowing good infiltration or water storage, you're not getting efficient use of your irrigation infrastructure. It's kind of like putting a $100 saddle on a $10 horse. You need to really pay attention to soil health in order for your irrigation system and your soils actually to perform up to snuff. So, yeah. So, and plus, I don't know if you're aware, we're mostly working with degraded resource. This study that I'm showing here, this study estimated that about 3/4 of the land in North America has degraded soils. It's mostly due to lack of organic matter. That results in a lot of negative things, compaction, infiltration rates decrease pretty significantly. Salinity is also a problem in the West. And that's why we need to start investing in our soils. With the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, being implemented, it's probably likely that water will be a little bit less plentiful in the future. So our soils, we need to get our soils in better shape to allow infiltration of every drop of rainwater and irrigation water. What Dr. Bali and others are going to be, or have discussed and will be discussing today, that's part of the toolbox. Just to note that well-managed soils infiltrate and store water, not to mention nutrients, much more effectively than poorly managed soils. And the kind of the secret or the main functional characteristic of well-managed soils is the presence of sufficient amounts of organic matter to help the soil ecology, help the soil function to its maximum potential. And the thing is, our soils really aren't ready for the stresses, which include extreme rainfall events, droughts, extreme wind events. Last week I saw, you know, I work up here in the Sacramento Valley. There was a lot of our fine clay soils blowing down into San Joaquin Valley. And if we have a southerly wind, well, we get some of that soil back, but it's not an ideal way of managing your soil. So I don't know if any of this looks familiar, but there's a cost for ignoring the soil ecology. I don't think we've been managing as a society our soils for the soil ecology. We've been kind of trained to add NPK and kind of ignoring the microbiology, which really drives soil function. So there's the cost is poor infiltration of rainwater and irrigation water. That picture on the left, a lot of that water won't drain in, and it's affecting the roots of those almond trees. It's creating anaerobic conditions. Roots don't like that kind of thing. It allows disease. And then on the right there, that's when these soils, when all this water evaporates and goes away, that's what you're left with. You have these soils that are sealed up with clay, like a clay layer on top of a fine seal that doesn't allow water infiltration. It doesn't allow air infiltration, and roots need to breathe. And so if you're managing your soils where the aggregates are easily destroyed, then you're going to have these sealed soils. So poor recharge of the water table, more flooding downstream and more silt going downstream, ever decreasing water storage capacity of the soils, because the organic matter is like a sponge. It has the ability to absorb and store a lot more water than most of the mineral components. Lack of nutrient storage, soil erosion from wind and rain, and as I said, anaerobic conditions. You don't want that in your soil. So the reason I'm showing this slide, the only reason is you have sand, silt, and clay particles, and you want to have these particles to be aggregated together. And this only happens in biologically active soils. There's the fungal component of the microbial ecosystem provides these glomalins. They're essentially glues that create these aggregates, these stable aggregates. If you have sufficient bacteria, there's polysaccharides, which also act like glues. And these soil aggregates are critical to soil function. If you have these stable aggregates, the picture on your left, you have infiltration of the water happens much more readily, gets into the root zone, and then ultimately into the water table. If you have the situation on the right, unstable aggregates, the second you have some rainfall, those aggregates fall apart. The clay particles go up to the surface, they form the seal, then subsequent rain or irrigation water is going to run off. It's not going to be absorbed as readily. So what happens at the surface sometimes doesn't stay at the surface. Good soil structure, you have better infiltration. No soil structure, very little infiltration. And what's the payoff for adding organic matter? Well, just kind of the opposite of all those things I mentioned earlier. Plus, it resists compaction. Most of our soils have what I call a plow layer, or like an area that it's condensed, and water and roots can't really get past it very easily. And, if you're an orchardist, I've seen this reported from walnut and almond farmers. Some of these folks started using cover crops, including some mustards. And in walnuts, the Pratolincus problems decreased dramatically. And almonds, root knot decreased very dramatically. So there are a lot of benefits to managing your soil as an ecosystem. guess I'll leave it at that. You know, I'm just going to cover a few chipping prunings. This has become pretty standard practice. I feel, you know, and a lot of the orchardists rotate, kind of do alternate chipping. So this year, one alley will be the home to the prunings and the chippings. And the next year, the alternate alley will be. And that way you can spread the kind of the organic matter wealth across your orchard. Cover crops, especially, you know, there's a lot of new orchards, almond orchards and pistachio orchards, a few new walnut orchards, not that many, going into the ground, especially with new orchards. You know, why not cover that ground? You know, you might even be able to get some wheat hay off the alleys in the first few years. You're not going to need to shake the trees to drop the nuts on the orchard floor anyways for the first few years. So why not manage your soil if you can, you know, put in some cover crops. You'll be pretty surprised at the benefits. And compost too. I've seen this this orchardist put the compost right kind of at the drip line where the irrigation is going to be most effective and where the water will infiltrate and where the trees will pick it up. So that's a smart way to do that. And then increasing soil organic matter will help with sandy soils. You know, I've worked quite a bit taking soil samples down in Stanislaus County, you know, which is north of you, but there's sandy soils everywhere, and well, they don't really hold soil moisture very well. So increasing organic matter, like putting in some cover crops, use of compost, chipping prunings, that will help some of these sandy soils store more water and nutrients. And well, it will also help clay soils kind of loosen up a little bit. So enough about soils. They're really important. I really feel like we haven't invested enough in soil health, and I think you'll benefit from starting to do some of that. So, end management. This is a site that the CDFA put together with the FREP, the Fertilizer Research and Education Program. It provides some pretty good guidance about what are the appropriate amounts of nitrogen and other nutrients to provide to annual crops as well as your perennial crops. So I'd encourage you to kind of take a look at this. Lots of good information in there. And this, well, this you've probably all recognized. I've been filling these out for a few years now, I'm guessing. We'll focus on the end component. And there's parts per million listed and milligrams per liter. They're the same if you're reporting on nitrate, and those are two ways to say the same thing. And the concentration of the nitrogen in your irrigation water, it can be obtained from several sources. Local district testing, if your RCD does that, you might want to just test on your own, send it into a lab for analysis. You should probably test your irrigation water a couple times per year because the nitrate concentration in your irrigation water may change over the year. Now, if you're into math or into equations, here's one way to figure out if you get a nitrate N report back from the lab, it's going to be in milligrams per liter probably. And so what you want to do is convert that to how many milligrams per gallon. So that's, you multiply that milligrams per liter or parts per million times 3.78. That's how many liters per gallon. So that'll give you milligrams nitrate per gallon. And then if you multiply times 27,154, that will give you how many gallons per acre inch. And that will essentially give you the milligrams of nitrate per acre inch. Okay. But who knows, you know, milligrams, that's not what we use. We use like pounds or ounces, pounds per acre feet applied. So there's 453,592 milligrams per pound. So if you divide what you've gotten so far after you've multiplied times the 27,154 gallons per acre inch, if you divide that by that larger number, 453,592, that will end up giving you the N credit in pounds per acre applied. So, but there are a lot easier ways to do this. There's a lot of tables you can access on the internet. This table is quite easily used, and if you have a report from your lab that's in between, you know, 15 and 20 or 20 and 25, you can interpolate, you know, if you had, say, 17 parts per million, that's kind of right in the middle of 15 and 20. At 15 parts per million, that's in 1 inch of irrigation water, you'd have 3 pounds per acre. And at 20 parts per million, you'd have 5 parts per million. At 17 parts per million, you'd probably be right in the middle at 4 pounds of nitrogen applied per acre inch. And then the MPEP folks have developed some really nice nitrogen calculators on their website. And you can download these if you go down to that lower blue button. You can download the calculator and put it on your hard drive. And so that's what this looks like. You can put in the nitrate and analysis from the lab right here, and then how many inches of water that you're irrigating with, 2 to 4 or half an inch, whatever. It's also helpful if you have your irrigation efficiency. And that's what the speakers today are talking about. Doubtful that anybody here has 100% efficiency. You may have 90 or even 95, maybe 85, but you need to include your irrigation efficiency down in this box where there's, the default is 100, but I don't think anybody has 100% efficiency here. So that is a very easy way to figure out how much nitrate you're applying or how much nitrogen you're applying. And if you have a couple different sources, they have spreadsheets for that as well. Say if you have a well water and you're using some surface irrigation water too, but you need to know the nitrate concentrations of both of those. And if for some reason there's some ammonium tends to evaporate very, very quickly. But maybe you have some ammonium in your water, and you can include that as well. So making an end budget, for example, if you're using almonds, end demand for almonds, and you know, this is applied, and then what you're removing with the almonds is about 68 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 pounds of kernels. So, you know, if you have a couple thousand pounds, your processor reports back a couple thousand pounds per acre. You have about 100 and, 2 times 68, 136 pounds of nitrogen removed via the export of that crop. Keep in mind also, your trees are growing, and they're, especially if you have kind of youngish kinds of trees, say 9 to 13 and even earlier, those almond trees absorb or use up about 25 to 30 pounds per acre annually, just incorporating into their tissue. So that's something to keep in mind. Other inputs are pretty straightforward, and the way our soils are working, unless you have, say, 4 or 5% organic matter, most of your fertilizer, what you apply as chemical fertilizer, that's pretty much immediately available to the plant. But for other amendments, manure, compost, cover crops, it's not quite what you disc in or plow in or what you apply in compost. It's not going to be the amount of nitrogen that is going to be available to the plant. And so, let's see here, organic amendments, any nutrient applications from sources that do not have a guaranteed nutrient content, such as compost and manure applications. The applied organic amendments should be reported as the amount of nitrogen available to the plant during the crop year in pounds per acre. And in all of these situations, manure is, you'll get a lot more nitrogen, percentage of the nitrogen applied in manure than, say, you would say from compost or even a cover crop. But for example, most composts have about 1% nitrogen. But I would highly recommend that you ask your compost supplier if you're applying compost. And, the Healthy Soils program has a really good cost share for applying compost. They will provide 50, you can apply 6 to 8 tons of a particular carbon nitrogen ratio compost, 6 to 8 tons of compost per acre at $50 a ton. And that's a really good, that's a good deal. And if your soils are maybe not up to snuff, I would highly recommend you take advantage of this cost share, because it's a great deal, and they provide that for 3 years in a row. Most compost suppliers are hesitant to give you the analysis, because anything with an analysis that's sold, like an NPK analysis, is considered a fertilizer, and so it's subject to the mill tax that fertilizers are subject to in California. But most compost suppliers do have an idea. They've had their compost analyzed and can give you an idea about where that nitrogen percentage is. But as a default, use 1%. And so you might consider 5 tons an acre application. That's about 10,000 pounds. At 1%, that would provide 100 pounds, which is a fair amount of nitrogen. However, in all the reading and talking to farmers and folks that know more about this than I do, only about 15 to 20% of that compost, of that nitrogen in that 10,000 pounds of compost you applied, or that 100 pounds of applied N, only about 15 to 20% of that will be available to the plant for this cropping season. So, you'd put in your nitrogen management plan, you'd put in 15 or 20 pounds, not the 100 pounds, because that's essentially not what's available to the plant. I'll talk about what, you're building up reserves in your soil of nitrogen as well as organic matter. But, and those will be metabolized and drawn down in future cropping cycles. And the thing with chemical fertilizers versus, manure or compost or cover crops is the nitrogen in chemical fertilizers is essentially, it's available to the plant. It's in a form available to the plant. All the nitrogen in these organic sources, manure, compost, and cover crops, it's attached to carbon. And so it has to be metabolized by the soil biology in order for most of it to be available to the plant. It's like slow nitrogen, I call it. Cover crops are kind of trickier. You know how much you're applying with compost, right? Or how much manure you're going to be applying. And with manure, I'd suggest you want to do a light disc. If you're applying straight manure, do a light disc to incorporate it into the ground. Otherwise, you're going to probably within just a few days of application, you're going to lose about half of the nitrogen content of that manure. So for cover crops, this is a little bit more involved, and but what I'm going to outline here is it'll give you a ballpark figure, and you're going to have to do some sampling of your cover crop. How much biomass. You want to figure out how much biomass, and then how much dry biomass, and then guesstimate what is the percentage of nitrogen in that biomass. The way I've done this, and I've seen a lot of RCDs do this and other groups, I use a 2x2 foot square. 1 inch PVC works quite well. And then in order to get a handle on how much biomass your cover crop is putting out, you need to cut all the vegetation in that 2x2 foot square. Cut all the vegetation down at ground level. You don't rip up the roots, you just cut it at ground level as close as you can get it. You weigh that, and you want to take a few samples just to get kind of a better average. Now, I take generally 3 samples because it is time consuming. It's a little bit of a pain, but the more samples you take, the better kind of average weight of the biomass you'll end up developing. So take a few samples, put them in a bag, which you've already weighed, because you want to subtract the weight of the bag from that sample. So knowing you have 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. In this example, the average weight of the 3 samples I'm saying is going to be 1.5 pounds. So maybe at 1.7, 1.5, and 1.3, and it averaged out to 1.5 pounds. So the weight of 4 square feet is 1.5 pounds, and you can extrapolate that out using this equation. How many 4 square feet plots you have, essentially you divide 43,560 by 4, and that'll give you how many times you need to multiply 1.5 pounds by. So that comes out to roughly 8 tons or 16,335 pounds per acre of wet cover crop. Now that sounds like a lot until you figure like most of that, say in this cover crop picture up on the left corner there, that's pretty lush. That's in the spring. I think that was taken April, maybe April. Yeah, sometime in April. That cover crop has about 85% of that cover crop is water weight. So it's just just water. So in order to get the dry weight, or the weight of the dry matter portion of the cover crop, multiply times 0.15, which is the percentage of that cover that will be, you know, after all the water is taken out. So multiply the wet biomass times 0.15, that gives you about 2,450 pounds per acre dry weight. Okay, pretty straightforward. That's like 1.25 tons of dry weight organic matter you're adding in. And a guesstimate of the percent nitrogen in this cover crop, you know, and this is variable. If you have a straight legume cover crop, say legume and bell beans, you know, legumes are going to have a higher percent of nitrogen, 3%, maybe up to 3.5%. If this is a mixed cover crop, there's mustards, there's a couple legumes in there that you can't see, and then there's some a small grain in there as well. So that would be kind of in the middle. I guesstimated a 2% for this cover crop. But if you have just using triticale as a cover crop, you know, that's kind of the beginner cover crop. That might be just 1 or 1.5%, depending on the time that you know, chop that and perhaps disc it in. If you wait until, say, a grass is heading out, the ratio of the carbon nitrogen ratio is going to be quite a bit higher. There's going to be essentially more carbon than nitrogen, which is most often the case, but the amount of nitrogen available to help digest the carbon that you're putting into the soil is going to be perhaps insufficient. So the cover crop, if you disked in like a seed headed triticale cover, you know, with the seed head already coming out, likely you would be using up some of the nitrogen in your soil already, and it would be a detriment to the short-term nitrogen availability. Okay, hope that's not too confusing. So I guesstimated here, this cover crop is 2%. So 0.02 times the dry weight of that cover crop is that yields about 49 pounds of nitrogen per acre from that cover crop. But once again, only about half of that cover crop will be available to the trees or to the following crop. And that's because all this stuff is linked to nitrogen, all the nitrogen is linked to carbon. And so the microbiology has to process this. So in this case, you'd put in the plant available nitrogen would be about 25 pounds, roughly. And here's a schematic that kind of outlines what's happening in your soils. So this top box, the whole box is how much nitrogen you're applying, either in compost or in a cover crop, but only about the blue square represents what is plant available and for that particular year. And in year 2, if you do another cover crop, well, you'll have the same situation, but from the previous year's cover crop or compost, you'll have additional nitrogen in that organic matter that has not yet been metabolized, and therefore the nitrogen that is associated with that organic matter has not yet been made available to the plants. And so if you're regularly adding organic matter to your crop, to your soils, you're building up these reserves. You know, now guesstimating how much is available from the reserves, that's a trickier matter, and I won't go into that here today. Just to know that you're building up reserves of organic matter, you're creating a healthier soil, and that that will help your plants withstand some of the stresses that we're going to be heading up into. So I think Jeff had mentioned these programs already. The CDFA Healthy Soils Incentives Program, their online application will be available, I've been told, at the end of this month or early November. And they have a lot of cost share practices. They've taken a lot of the NRCS practices and just replicated them. But I think they have better cost shares, to be blunt about it. NRCS also has their EQIP. I'm not going to go into the conservation stewardship program. I think most folks probably access NRCS programs through EQIP and then graduate from EQIP into the conservation stewardship program, the CSP. But CSP pay rates are somewhat complicated. So if you're interested, you can ask your NRCS folks. Jeff had mentioned the soil carbon practice standard. This is an interim practice standard. It's only being done by about 14 states across the country. California is one of them. This is a great cost share because you can apply biochar, you can apply compost. But again, I would say check out the CDFA cost share because I think it's a little bit better. And so with that, I'll take any questions. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much about some of the stuff I talked about. Capturing the amount of nitrogen from organic sources is kind of tricky.
You guys have Matt after me, and that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's right. So my name is Dominic, senior with NFM. I got asked to come and talk to you guys about system maintenance and about your irrigation systems on micro irrigation systems. So that's kind of going to be concentrating on. Show of hands in the room. Most of you guys, what are you growing or you're growing? Are you looking for almonds, row crops, everything? Almonds, wine grapes. Almonds, wine grapes for the majority. Okay. So it's the middle, right? Or the forward one.
It's so on the side.
On the side.
Yeah. Should be the top there. There we go.
Okay. So a couple things we can go over is like key conditions that you want to look at. No, back.
Going backwards. Good.
Oh, is that ready the wrong one?
I think so. There you go.
There it goes. Your system design, regular maintenance that you need to do. Your system maintenance that you should do for yearly would be more annual stuff, and the system components maintenance, what you're looking at. So, we've heard a lot of different things of what happens throughout the field, applying different chemicals, taking care of your soils, all those things, but a lot of it comes down to also on your drip irrigation system, that it's properly designed in the beginning, and then also it's properly maintained through the years. It'll make you more money if it's properly maintained, and if it's properly designed. So when we're looking at that type of stuff, we're first understanding your drip irrigation system. So one, like we already heard from several other things today, was about your soils. So we're talking about the soil and what we're looking at in there. What we're looking at when we're designing irrigation system is really understanding what your soil is made up of, what your infiltration rate is. Because if you put too much water on than what your soils can handle, no matter what condition they're in, then your infiltration, then the water will not go down. If water doesn't go down, then it's not useful to the root system. You're not taking your nutrients down there as well as the water. So then you're looking for puddling, and then you have evaporation. It'd be a waste of your time and your pump money, as well as your water, which has become obviously more prized in California through a lot of years. So that again comes back to your soil makeup. So if you've got either sand, clay, sandy loams, if you've got, like Matt talked about, he's got a real sandy strip that runs through his piece of property. You can actually make your system understand that and design it so that you have a different output in those areas and the way you spread the water out, so that we can maximize that soil. You're not just wasting water or wasting your time or wasting pump energy as well. Since we all know PG likes to charge quite a bit for water these days to just pump it out of the ground. Again, the other thing is understanding your water source. So where your water is coming from is real important. So if you've got well or surface, if you've got a max of both, if you're also looking at testing your water, you want to know what's in there. It's got high bicarbonates. So if you got high bicarbonates, do you want to apply acid? It would be no, because it actually solidifies it. It'll make it solidify inside your emitters. And then you have like a white gel in there, which will plug everything up. You also know if you want to add acid, to change your pH. If you want to look at chlorine because you have a lot of organic matter, or if you want to go to our natural with like a hydrogen peroxide, which is C2L certified, so that it actually has a higher activation rate per gallon, but it will cost you a little bit more. But it's something else we can look at, or a combination of both the line cleaners, or how to do a lot of push out if you ever have a root protrusion or something like that. So that's why testing your water is really important. Also, by testing your water, you're going to find out what your sustainable solids are, which is what your solids are that are held in the water. It obviously makes you understand what kind of filtration you want. So if you want to run a screen, if you want to run three-dimensional filtration like a disc or a sand, or if you want to just run no filtration at all, depending on what you're applying it through. And then third would be your gallons per minute, or fourth would be your gallons per minute. So what you're looking at there is, can you actually apply the amount of water that you need for your crop? So if you don't have enough water for, say, almonds that need 3.5 acre feet, then do you plant almonds? You know, do you have enough water that year for tomatoes, but not for permanent crop? This is all the stuff that we see a lot of people trying to push and push and push, but then they wonder why their product they have out in the field is not performing. So understanding what you have in the surface, what you have under the ground, and what you can apply through water is real important to understand if you can actually do the crop that you have in mind in order to produce off of. The other thing is, what you hear is when you're doing this is, what's the reality of what you need in your area? You know, you have the crop averages, you have the soil averages, but really understanding where you are in a specific area and your specific soils will allow you to understand if you can actually apply and produce what you're looking for. So to go from there, we go to the system design. So the system design is pretty simple. You know, you got your water source. So I actually have one here. Okay. So you have your water source, obviously, well, something of that nature. You have your filtration, which in this case is right here. You have your emission devices, which is either going to be a micro sprinkler, in our case, a micro jet, or a drip line, which are emitter, or a punch on emitter. And then your run times. Your run times is also really important, especially as we go through this time of watching PG change around their flex. Has actually made it easier. I don't know if you guys know the on peak and on and off peak has actually changed, made it a lot easier for a farmer. It's just only 4 hours, 3 hours a day that you can shut on and off. And you have 2 full days optional to see if you opt into the program that you can run 24 hours straight, all on off peak hours. But as soon as you touch that little bit of on peak, then you get charged for that on peak. So your systems are, you know, when you come to system performance, you know, you want to maintain your distribution uniformity. We talked about 90s pluses. When systems are designed, they're always going to be up in the 90 plus range. That's what we're looking at doing. Either a PC, which is pressure compensating, or a non-PC. DU, just, I know if I'm telling you guys rudimentary, I apologize, but DU is distribution uniformity, which is how evenly the water is spread out over the whole system. So when you look at that, that's where you want to be up in the 85 to 90%. But what does that difference really mean? So what can really affect your DUs is, one is runtime. If you have a higher, you know, if your DU is down at 85 compared to 95, you're going to have to run longer to put out the more uniform water. That's just as what it is. So you're going to be either pushing things past your root zone, or you're not going to be applying enough if you're just trying to match it. So understanding what your actual DU is is very important. So you get it obviously when you first put in a system, and like was recommended, you probably want to test your system every year to every other year to make sure it's maintaining that. It's something you can pay somebody to do, or you can learn how to do it yourself by going to ITRC or the CIT at Fresno. They do courses that you can go learn how to do it individually. It doesn't take a lot of time to make sure you know what you're doing. So that is also important when it comes to nitrogen management. So if your DUs are off and you're applying your too much water, too little water, then your nitrogen is not going to be put in the root zone. So especially when you're talking about almond, which has most of its feeder roots in the top 2 feet, 85% of them. Now, when you talk about a grape, you're looking to actually cover the full 5-foot basis all the way down, usually pretty even roots that feed off of those. So you have a little bit more leeway on a grape. But almonds, which has been our most cash crop throughout the valley and which most people are planting, it's real important to understand where you're applying and putting your water and your nutrients. So you want to make sure that if you're again applying, you want to make sure your nitrogen is at the same wire. Sustainability. Now, this has become a fun buzzword for us in ag, but there's a lot of things around this, but mainly what it comes around to is water. I mean, we cannot grow without water. So we want to make sure that if you have a higher DU, it makes you more, it can keep your sustainability higher. If your DU drops, it can go lower. And then we have the ultimate ROI, which is your return on investment. So just a quick note, if you drop 10% in say an almond orchard on your DU, and you don't actually know that, so you're still applying thinking you have a 92 or 93% DU, and you're applying it and it's actually 85, that can affect you up to about 400 pounds to the acre. And the reason I will do that is because you're not going to be giving the water evenly to all the plants, and so when that happens, they're not going to ripen at the same. So then you're going to have nuts sticks. Then we'll have wind up with mummies. So then you have to come back and do even more aggressive shaking in the end. So you don't only cost yourself just the $400 an acre on what are 400 pounds per acre. That one season, it's going to keep going that way until you understand what you need to fix on the system, or that you start irrigating correctly to what your system's capabilities are, so you make things more even. Then on top of that, you have your mummy shaking, you have more labor, you have the increase in diseases and other things like that. So it's real important to make sure that when you look at these systems, it doesn't only affect just supplying water, it affects the livelihood of whatever plant you
Is DU easy to, can we do DU?
Yes.
Is it, and what is it, how do you measure DU?
So that's why, like I said, there's classes that, like, if you want to take a quick class, there's a one-day class over at ITRC in Cal Poly, give you an excuse to go to San Luis for a day or two, if you like that kind of stuff. And then you can go over there and you can look at it and they go through the full class. It's not a difficult system. It's a little bit time consuming, just, for measurements and pressure and catch can and stuff like that, and doing it various places. But I've done it throughout my career when I was farming, and I've done it on the other sides of where I've been. So it's not very difficult to do, but it's pretty simplistic, but it just takes a little bit of time. Okay, other things that can affect your DU. This is actually one of the number one things, or I say number two, and that's operating outside of the way the system was designed. So a lot of farmers, I have this happen quite a bit, and Matt did too back in his previous days when he worked as for Western, is that you'll design a system to be a two-set system. So you have two blocks, you have to run independently in order for it to put out the proper amount of water and be properly pressurized. Well, when the plants are young, like, oh, never mind, I don't need as much water, I'm only gonna put on, turn on the whole thing and just run it. Well, if the pressures aren't right, the system's not balanced, and that'll make your DU crash. And I've seen this a lot, and that's very unfortunate on a newer orchard or a newer vineyard, because that's the most crucial time to get that plant started. That's when the roots are the smallest, and it's really crucial to keep that water right next to where you want it to be at the root zone to help it expand out. So that's why it's always a key to always run these systems the way they were designed. So again, it goes back to larger sets than they were designed and running at the proper pressures. So another fact that we've seen is people have turned down their VFDs because they want to save a little bit of money, which is a variable frequency drive. This is an adjustable motor, or the old original, which is a diesel. We throttle back the diesel, right? Because, oh, we don't need to put out as much. I don't need that much pressure. Again, the pressure is designed in order for the system to operate correctly. One of the major factors of pressure is your filtration system. You want to make sure your filtration system has a proper pressure to backflush if it's an automatic system. Again, if you go out into the field, your pressure compensating emitters need so much pressure for them to seep so they work correctly. Most of your drippers are going to be anywhere from 8 to 10 pounds. Now, when you get to a spinner or a sprinkler, most of those are actually up at 25 pounds, and that's not at the valve, that's at the end of the line, which means it needs to be at your farthest point from the pump. That's the minimum pressure you need. The reason that is, that's so the diaphragms will see and they'll start doing their job, which is pressure compensating. They use that pressure in order to make sure the water's always the same coming out. So again, this type of stuff can actually affect up to 20%. And that's where you can really see some huge variance. So again, if you're designed around 90%, 95%, and you're not getting all this stuff done, then that can happen and affect you all the way. Now, the number one culprit though, is that maintenance. That is the number one culprit of what actually makes people's DUs drop. So in that idea, do we maintain things? Do you guys brush your teeth today? Also, you know, do you take a bath? If you don't cry during it. You know, do we play? Do we do exercise? Do we eat? Do we clean our pools? Do we take care of our spas if we have one? Again, our vehicles. You know, I've never seen one farmer hesitate to put money back in their truck to make sure the oil's changed or to put brakes on their truck. But if you ask them, hey, did you flush your lines this week or this month? I just do it once a year. You know, so that's the stuff that really makes you think about it. Now, all this stuff, even down to a tractor, can cost $100,000 to $150,000, right? A harvester can cost $200,000. We make sure those are extremely important and they're taken care of properly. Irrigation systems cost us anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 to $4,000 an acre. They're a very expensive system. They're also not maintenance free. So it's real important to make sure we take care of that maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay, so what needs to be maintained? There's actually about three major focuses to really look for of how you do your maintenance throughout a year. First is going to be your startup maintenance. Then you're going to have your in-season maintenance, and you're going to have your year-end maintenance. That's it. Well, it's kind of funny. I think the year-end used to be a lot more aggressive than it used to be. It seems like we're always moving out basically 12 months out of the year, but you know, if we ever really have a true winter with a nice hard freeze, it'd be nice. And then you have your winterization. Okay. So system components require maintenance. Oops, you're going backwards. Go back there. There it is. Okay. So it requires maintenance. It's going to be everything. Your primary filtration, your pressure relief valves, your chem check valves, your air vents, your main lines, your sub mains, and finally your dripper lines or emission devices. There are a couple lines that are really forgotten about that's kind of disappointing that are really important in your system that people always overlook. And the two primaries are going to be air relief and your air vents. Those are two that really make a difference. Can we freeze it?
You need me to.
Yeah, go ahead, click to the next slide. Okay, so primary filtration. So how many of you use sand media? We'll start there. Okay, screens. Anybody use disc? Use disc. I use everything. You're not loyal to anything, are you? I get it. Okay, that's perfect. So we'll start with the easy. So we look at filtration maintenance. You got your startup maintenance. So what that is after you come off the season, right? It's been a nice winter. We got 10 and 12 inches, 14 inches of rainfall. We had, a couple of months of freeze, so the flies and mosquitoes are finally dead after 4 years. It'd be really nice for 1 year to have that. So you're going to start up. So you really want to make sure that when you first start up that everything works. If you have sand medias, open them up, make sure they have sand inside. I know it sounds stupid, but it happens. The sand is what the media is in order to do it. If you have discs, make sure they didn't sit all winter long in something and that they weren't clean. And so that way, if they're full of algae and full of scum when you first start, then they're going to have problems. Same if you have a screen. Screen and disc are the same. You want to make sure they're clean. Discs are really easy. You get a high pressure washer, you do them right on the system. For screens, you pull the screen out and clean it out if it had a problem. Then when you first go to fire up, make sure everything works. All right. So most of these systems, actually all of these are automatic. So when you're going to fire them up, make sure the backflush system works. Make sure the solenoids work. Make sure your pressure differential works. Pressure differential is the most important thing if you're going to walk away from your system, because that's what automatically makes it backflush if you get a difference between the inlet and the outlet pressure. If those don't work correctly, you could have 65 pounds sitting on top and out in the field. We already went over what happens when we have the problem out in the field. So that's why it's real important to make sure they work. Now, for your disc filtration, you're looking at probably changing out your disc every 7 to 9 years. And that's because the discs over time, they're plastic, they rub on each other, they wear. If you look at a screen, if you're not an automatic screen, just a basic screen, you just want to make sure there's no holes punched in it, no gaps, nothing pushing out from sand or anything else pushing on it, or there's not a lot of sand lodged in it. And that over time, you have to look at replacing that. If it's an automatic screen filter, you want to make sure that there's no rubbish and that the bearings are working correctly. Those bearings can all be replaced about every other year is what you're looking on a bearing on an automatic screen. When you get to sand, which is probably our most robust and best filtration we have out there, it's a 3-dimensional. So the only 3-dimensional filters we have in agriculture right now is sand or disc. Everything else is 2-dimensional. A screen is just a flat surface that it goes through. Screens are more of water polishers. So if you have a lot of sand start up on wells, which I find this is going to be an ongoing, because usually sand becomes a problem off of wells. Wells drop, they start pulling harder. So when you look at screens, you only take about 1 to 3 parts per million of sand before they have problems. Discs can take up to 5 to 7 parts per million of sand before they have problems with it. That's because then the sand gets lodged between the discs and it doesn't let the water, it lets bigger objects go through. Sand medium can handle up to 10 parts per million of sand. So it can handle a little bit more. So there's a way that you can work with us or your local dealers that can come out and help test that for you to see what's going on. Now for proper sand solutions, you're looking anywhere from 3 to 7 pounds, or you need to go through that before you get through your system. Again, something to remember when you're looking at your pressure and how much balance you have. There's a company in town kind of gets Monero pumping and help you make your pump bigger too. So the most common thing I get asked on sand is how often you drop your sand. So you're going to want to change out your sand every 5 to 7 years. The reason that is sand, when it's really put in, is actually angular. So it's real sharp. Okay, it's silicon. Over time, it rubs and it rubs and it rubs. And it becomes smooth like a stone, like a river stone. But what that does is it makes your filtration tighter than it needs to be, which means you're over filtering and you're actually going to be wasting water and more backflush. So every 5 to 7 years, you're going to want to drop it. Now I get the question all the time, what about I add new sand on top? Well, that's nice. That means your sand on top is doing its job correctly, but the sand on bottom is still filtering harder than it needs to. So that can create you more issues. The other thing to really look at it when you open them up every time you start the season is dig down and see if you can find a layer. So kind of like in soil, if you guys have ever developed ground, if you ever find a layer, what do you have to do? You usually rip it to break that layer up. Well, you can't really rip a sand media tank. So if that layer of mud or gut or organic matter is deeper than 6 inches in the bed, you're going to need to drop that bed. It's not going to come back out, no matter whose sand media you use. They're all designed very similar. They're all pressure vessels. So it's something important to remember on sand that you're going to have to drop that and do that. That usually is more common when you have a surface water application. You get like a glug of mud or glug of sand, it just gets pushed back down in there. So if your pressure differential is not working correctly, then it's not back flushing out. All the simple things to make sure. Yeah.
It's so normal, regular. How much speed should you be adding in a year?
If it's set correctly, maybe a bag of 50 pounds. If you're overset, and where you get that set point is on your backflush throttling valve. So it goes out 3 or 4 inch backflush. That valve should not be open more than 3.5 cranks. If it's open more than that, you're letting too much of your sand flow back out. Okay. That back pressure is important in order to pop and lift that bed and stir it without the bed leaking. Okay, so during the season, again, go by and just make sure it's working. You want to open them up every now and then if you feel like something's not right. You need to make sure that they're working correctly. 2 is when you have your automatic backflush, sit there once and hit manual and watch it go through every single cylinder. Because if it's not, then you've got one tank that's not working correctly, or one disc pack that's not working correctly, or in a screen situation, it's not backflushing at all. So there's something that you want to make sure that you're doing that. Also during the season, on all these, you usually have a little command filter, right? A little 3/8 tube that comes off, got a little black command filter. You want to clean that at least once a week, because if that's dirty, the water doesn't go to the valves, then the valves don't backflush. So it's very important stuff you do through the season. Into season to winterization, this is some old tricks I like to do on my farms. If there's, look at your individual manufacturers, but when I typically, especially on sand medias, will start there. I'll take 2 gallons of muriatic acid. I'll turn the pump on, fill the system up, shut off the valve that's right below the filter so the filter stay full. Shut the pump off. Open the top of those sand medias and you find that they're still full of water. Okay. You take 2 gallons of muriatic acid, you pour them in the 48-inch tank, you bolt it back shut, and you let it sit for about 4 hours. What that'll do is it'll break up all the organic matter in there and eat it up without damaging the wall of your filter. And then you can go ahead and do a power flush at the end. You fire your pump back up, pull it back up, put a little more back pressure in those tanks, maybe like 60 pounds, and run through a back flush. That'll break up and loosen everything out. Then you shut the system down and can go to bed for the winter. And that actually helps prevent anything from, sitting on the sides, eating away, really binding your sand. It'll help break it up and let it run better. When you go to your disc, you want to take off the covers of the disc, get a high pressure gun out, loosen them a little bit, and spray them down in here and spin, get all the stuff to fling off, and it flings off, and that way they're done. This one. What acid did you say? I use muriatic acid. You go to Home Depot, you get it in a 2-pack in gallons for a swimming pool. It's real simple. Again, for your screen, pull the screen out, high pressure, clean it, slide it back in, and then you're done. It's kind of your end of season and winterization, pretty much the same thing. Oh, no, on winterization, sorry. One thing else you want to do if we're in cold situations, we're in California, so not really. But if you're in cold situations, drain out the little bit, take an air gun, put on that 3/8 line and punch it through and drain out your air lines. The water lines that fed to your solenoid. So that line is about 3/8, right? But that little pinhole that goes through that solenoid is very, very small. So if you can get all that air out of there, you'll be fine. Now, we do occasionally have a 15 or 16 or 20 degree freeze. That can actually freeze that inside your solenoid and pop the solenoids. Those will cost a couple $100 or $100 to fix. So it's something, just a little preventative maintenance if you want to do it. Okay, things like this. I know it's kind of hard to see, but so this is a backflush valve, and then right there is a nice rock that's sitting right there. So you get those inside of your backflush valve, stuff like that. I'm still not sure how I took this picture. I'm not sure how that rock went through the pump, but it did. And so that's simple things you just want to look for. So take apart, make sure if any valves are sticking, just look for them. And then all these valves usually have a shaft. So if you have the valve open anyways, take a little marine grease, wipe it down that shaft, and keep it clean. Don't use a petroleum base. You want to use a marine or a silicone base, because that way it doesn't eat it, the gaskets or anything like that. It just does what you're looking for. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the one thing I always think is always, you guys are going to hate me for this, but so you guys know what this thing looks like, right? You guys probably have a lot of your systems, the Chevy 57 Chevy spring thing we got. They don't work. Okay. I know there's some micro manufacturers that would hate me saying this, but these things are ridiculous that you can ask anybody. Because what they do is, in order to make them pop, is say your system's an 85 PSI system before it's drilled, so you have to set it 75. Well, it's a spring. So you have to keep adding pressure to that thing to keep making it open more and more, which means you're still increasing the pressure on the system. So that becomes a problem. Also, if you drop the system, that's a spring, so it's going to slam it shut. That creates water hammering, which means you just shoved a lot of pressure down in your system, which can have also catastrophic issues. So my suggestion is go for hydraulic style valve. The difference between the two of these is like $150. When you look at the size of the system, it's costs you pennies and less than pennies. But it's extremely important. What's nice about them is you can adjust them. You can test them. They always usually have a pressure gauge. You can put one next to it. So throughout the season, again, a lot of maintenance is you take that, you leave the lock nut on there, and you screw it down into it, and you'll watch it blow off. And then you screw it back out to where you had your mark, so it's set back at your 70 PSI. That's how you know they work, but these are designed as soon as they hit their pressure, they full bore open. And then when they go below that pressure, they slowly close. And that's easier on the system. It's a lot safer for the system. Oh, I forgot there was animation. Sorry. So, if you want. So they look like that, right? They come in black or they come in plastic or in metal, depending on the size you want. And they'll be size. So talk to your local dealer who you deal with. You can ask him, hey, I got a 4-tank system, I got an 8-tank system. What should I have on there? It's either usually a 2 or a 3-inch. Real important, really easy, really overlooked. If you ever want to see one that's never worked, it's pretty easy. Go buy a set of filters, and if they don't have a straight wall on them, they're a little bit rounded. That means those tanks exceeded their pressure max because something didn't blow off. 99% of the time, if one of these is there, it will not see it. Now, if this is there and you go to test it, it doesn't work, then that means you can pull it off or have it fixed or get it fixed. So that way it always does work. I've actually seen these guys that were set at 75 pounds go over 150 before they ever blow off because they kind of rush up. was a great technology when it was designed, but things have improved. Okay, the other unsung hero and the most forgotten about part of your system is the air vent. Okay, startup. When you start your system, everybody's heard the air vents. They're blowing air out. It's real important they blow the air out. Does anybody know why it's important they blow the air out?
So they'll blow the line up.
Thank you. You must have done this before.
Once.
Twice. So what they're there for is the fact is to get the air out. So if your air vents are not working correctly, if they're plugged with something and you're firing the system up and you've got 45 pounds of water rushing down the thing and there's nowhere for the air to go, it compresses until it explodes. I've actually seen 15-inch lines explode 36 inches below the ground because the air vents didn't work. It's a fun hole. But it doesn't just affect that one spot. It cracks that pipe all the way back 200 to 300 feet back. Okay, simple thing, just making sure they work. During the season maintenance, again, when you're firing up, just make sure they're working. So in the off season, when I usually do it and our people do it, is that they go around and make sure air vents are clean. Pull them off, you inspect them. Almost all of these guys, are serviceable. So this guy here, which we've all seen a lot, there's different parts to them. I prefer more of these two, which is a continuous, which means it lets a lot of air out, but once the system's up and running, it also purge air that comes through the system. The metal ones that you see here, the challenge of those is that ball is so light that it'll actually shut before water comes out of it, which means you still let air in it. So if you have a really fast pump and it's really pushing hard, you're going to shut that with still a lot of air in it. The other thing, classically, what people do here, and if you look at a lot of pump guys, which Matt, I think, has all of his fingers, but they'll traditionally take their finger and they'll push down on that ball. If you want to look at a lot of old pump guys, they're kind of missing the tip of their thumb or a little bit right here because they do that and then it slaps back on their finger. And I've seen it. It's not fun. So that's something to make sure that you keep them clean, but you also be safe around. Winterization is, again, when we pull these things apart and take a look at them if you're concerned about it. During the season, you can always pull it apart, and the way you really see the classics, especially these guys over here, you're continuous. Whatever. These two guys over here is because they'll spit water continuously. Just always, you'll see a little green stuff coming out of them and that kind of stuff. That's when you need to make sure they all have like a slide inside of them that moves up and back. You just want to open them up and clean it. Another trick you can do if they've got a snorkel that can turn upright is you turn that snorkel upright. You take a 10-to-1 solution, 1 part bleach, 10 parts water. You pour it down in there, you let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then you roll that snorkel back over. What that'll do is that it kind of eats away at a little bit of the organic matter that's built up, and then that'll help free it up and then it'll clean out. You should always have the snorkels facing down because if you have them up, when you shut the system off, if there's water there, it's going to sit in there. When it sits in there, then it makes organic matter, then it makes them not work correctly. Okay, so it's simple stuff like that. So there's a real one. And this happens a lot, especially around filter stations. Sees the wasps, the bees, and then when it gets there, nobody wants to touch it. Oh, you need to clean it. No, I'm not doing that. So, everybody carries a can of wasp spray or something like that. But that's his class. I was actually taking right out my water. Then we have our filter stations. Oh, no, sorry. Our main lines are our pipelines. We already have filter stations. So your sand lines and mains, everybody kind of flushes them once every now and then and kind of walks away from you. So there's still debris that builds up in your main lines and your sub mains, and they need to be flushed. So when you first start up, it's always good to open, not all of them, because if you open all of them, are you going to get enough flow and pressure everywhere? So you want to start kind of at your mains, right? Open your main first. And there's always a fun thing when people start, they start and they open it up and it flushes out dirt for like a second. They go, okay, I'm done. And they shut it back down. So with that part you're getting for that first second, remember that's your 32 to 48 inches of cover on top of that. That's just that little bit that's stuck right there. You want to open them, wait another 30 seconds to a minute, make sure it's still running clean. A lot of times what happens is you'll get that first shot of dirt and then it'll go away and then you'll see another shot of dirt coming out after it's built up in your lines. Extremely important if you ever have a break. You want to make sure you get this out because after that filtration system, you don't have any more filters when you're going out to your field except for what's on your emission device. So the more big debris you can get out of the way, the better.
Is that your backyard?
No, it's not. No. So then you go to your sub-main flushes. This is in beautiful Yuma, Arizona. So these are just nice sub-main flushes that are set up. So you want your sub-main flushes, again, your main line, your sub-mains, you want to flush every time you start up. I know it makes a little bit of a mess around there. It takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes per area, but it's real important to keep your system clean. Now, it also depends on each individual system. If you go out there and you notice the first 2 times I'm starting up, or 4 or 5 times starting, it's always clear water, then wait a little while. Okay, this is not exact science. It also depends differently. Just how each one of us are different. So each individual system is designed for your individual farm. So there's going to be different characteristics, but you want to get in the practice of doing a little more maintenance instead of not doing it at all. So imagine if you only brush your teeth once a week, or, you only ate. Like I remind my kids, we're supposed to feed the dog every day. And like, oh, I forgot today. I'm like, cool, but we won't feed you today. I mean, there's simple things in life that you just have to remember. You that have kids know what I'm talking about. I don't know. It's okay. So we come to hydraulic valves. So usually in between your sub-main and mains, you'll find hydraulic valves. These are usually help to balance your system on your mainline pressures, to balance how things go out. If you have a non-pressure compensating system, they're even more important because they're to balance the water everywhere across your field, because your emitter is not going to do it for you. So on these guys, the same thing. You want to make sure they're working. Check on each side to make sure the pressure is there. You want to make sure that that you clean the lines out in the winter. Again, not so much for the pilots, but more for the solenoid. If you have an electric system, if you have an automated system, or you're doing things that are out there. The pilots have a little bit bigger orifice, but you want to make sure that they're working correctly. Your pilot, all the pilots you'll know, there's dial pilots, there's the bolt screw down pilots. They all have a vent tube. When the pilot is reacting, you need to let air in or out of the bonnet, which is the part on top, which allows the water to base on what you want to do. If you go by that system and that thing is always pushing water out, then you have a problem somewhere. Or if that pilot, or if the system's not reacting at all. The first culprit I ever find every single time I get called out to the field is the vent tube is plugged with either bugs in it or mud in it. So that vent tube is really crucial. So before you rip apart the valve, think there's something wrong, clean out the tubes real fast. That's where most of the culprits are going to happen. Either you get a little bit of organic matter in there, a little bit of rock or something like that, or on the vent tube especially, you get stuff that's built up in there. The critters in the winter love to hide, and it happens the same way up on a filter station. You got the valves there, and they have a vent tube. I've actually had a guy call me. He'd been working on a system for 3 hours, very experienced. He was frustrated. He goes, "I moved the valve around. I've done everything, and it just keeps happening." And I said, "You clean out the tubes?" He goes, "Yes." But you clean out the vent tubes? I'll call you back. And I got a text 2 minutes later. He goes, "I don't want to talk to you anymore," because that's what it was. He was on that thing for 3 hours. So just remember, when you're working on all this equipment, start at the simple things. It's kind of like we all call the cable guy. He goes, "Did you turn the power off?" I'm not stupid, but it needs to be done. Start at the simple things, right? Or when your phone doesn't work, it just won't work. The complex thing is just shut it off, turn it back on. Same thing here. So during in-season maintenance, again, making sure they work. Don't assume because it turned on for the last month all the time that it's still working exactly the same. Either you or your irrigators have them trained to go by and say, "Oh yeah, pressure's at 25, where it's supposed to be." A lot of guys do little tricks on that pressure gauge right there. They take a Sharpie marker, a little piece of paint, and they put it right where they want it to be. So that way they don't have to stare at it. Remember, they can just go by and go, "Yep, it's set at 28, yep, it's set at 30. So that way it's a simple eye reference, so you guys can go on and do other things. Just like your irrigators in the fields, you got other things for them to do, but if they can do things simply, it makes them go by and do it fast, and it's right, then it's easy. But if it's wrong, then you can fix it. And you need to fix it. So end of the season and winterization, again, the same thing. When you're shutting the system down, make sure you clean them out. Just pull the tubes off, blow them out, do something like that. We're a little bit easier here again because we're in the Central Valley. We don't get really hard freezes, but our guys like say in the Pacific Northwest have actually seen these things like separate because they didn't clean them out. And that's metal too. So again, we look inside. This is stuff that's inside the bonnet. So when there is stuff that's not reacting correctly, it's usually 6 or 8 or 10 bolts, depending on the size of your valve. You can take off the bonnet and look inside. Don't be scared of it. All that's inside of all these is just a rubber and a spring. You can open them up, find the debris, clean them out, put them back down if there's something not right. That's the one thing that's really simple. There's not a lot of real complicated stuff here. Now for valves, So there's different apps. I know we have an app for NetFM for our valves. If you hit that, it's online. It's the NetFM app for valves. It's NetFM USA valves. You can download it, and what's nice about it is it has all the schematics. So if you start taking a valve apart because there's something wrong, you can't remember how to put it back together, you can call your local dealer, or in our case, you can just look up the app. I think most of the other companies have a similar app that you can look up, and then all the plumbing is right there, so you get it plumbed back correctly. It's just missing one little T or something the wrong direction makes everything go bad, and then that is very frustrating. I've been on that situation. So your triple lines or your emission device, even if you have microjets, there's simple ways to flush. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but how do we really want to do it correctly? So if we're going to go on a heavy wall above ground. So when you're looking at any of this, either your micro sprinklers or on your drip on startup, you want to make sure that the system is running. Make sure it's pressured up. You don't want to flush your drip lines until your full pressures come up on your system. Okay. So when your system's up and running, then you're going to want to go ahead and flush it. You should always flush at the beginning of the season, no matter how you shut it down, because through the winter, things got in there, things happen. A lot of your pipes will dry, and whatever debris was stuck on the side of them can drop back down. Your binding units on your chemicals that you've been injecting will have gone away through the winter, and they'll let stuff free up. So the way you should really flush a drip line is you should only flush from the T one direction. Okay, because I have guys do both. You should never open every single one of them up, because you lose your pressure and your velocity. You need the velocity in order to clean the stuff out. You need the pressure in order to shove it all the way out, and your flow. So you usually should open, and my best rule of thumb, again, everybody's ranch is slightly different, but this is the best rule of thumb, is open 20 lines at a time. And typically what you do is you have one person start in the beginning, if you can do this. If not, it's a lot of double walking. And when he gets to number 20 or she gets to number 20, they kind of whistle back to the person that's at the start, and you just open and close the same, one person starts closing, the next person starts opening. So there's always about 20 open. And I've seen guys just running, no, just at a nice slow pace. And the reason you want to do that at a nice slow pace is that gives you enough time for that water to get from the T all the way out. Okay, and by doing that, I mean, I've been on a lot of fields where a guy goes, I got plugging. Well, how do you flush? I start here and I go all the way around. You open them all? Yeah. So let me guess, your plugging's over here. How'd you know that? Well, there's no flow. You never plug on this side, do you? No, it's always great. So you want to make sure that this is a rule of thumb. Okay. The other thing is you should be flushing your lines every 150 to 200 hours of operation. So under peak, you're looking about every 3 weeks. When you're off peak, it's not going to be as often. It's a rule of thumb. Open them up, look how much debris comes in your hand, or put it in a plastic bottle and see what's there. Again, it's not the initial, we always open trying to get that initial bloom. Like, oh, look at that. Well, that's just been sitting at the end of that line all the time. But when you leave it open, you see how constant it gets after about 5, 10, 15, or about 15 seconds. Then you should really start looking. Usually takes about a minute to 2 minutes, but that's where you're going to see where you want to make sure you clean everything out. It's real important. In season. So we all inject chemicals through our stuff, right? Well, you want to make sure that you clean your chemicals out. So this is a simple way to think about it for uniformity. When you apply your water and you start injecting chemicals or fertilizers, where do they go first? To the far side or the front side? They're going to the beginning. So say you put an hour of water on first because you want to pre-wet the soil. That allows everything to move into it. So then as you're running, say you run for 8 hours, and then you're going to shut off your chemicals. You want to run another hour and a half after that. The reason is because the clean water is going to go to the front side first to clean out where you had your chemical go first. It's going to go to the far side last to clean out the chemical last. It actually makes your chemical applications more balanced to make sure that you are putting pre and post water on. And then you let it sit. One recommendation I always recommend is skip an irrigation after that. The reason is, or 2 later, is you want to make sure you get your chemicals and stuff set right in the root zone where you want it. If you just keep applying more water afterwards, what are you going to do? You're going to push it past it. So you want to make sure that you're putting your chemicals on. They're not cheap, and they're not going to get any cheaper. If anybody's been taught us anything. So you want to make sure that you're applying it and then you're using it. And then you can clean it out. So that's why it's real important to do that. It helps balance what you're applying and also helps keep your system clean. Simple maintenance. End of the season winterization, you want to make sure you do a nice good flush at the end. If you think you've had a lot of binding, if you've got a lot of organic matter, I've seen on fields where you go by in a minute and you see green growing out of the dripper, It's always a good thing to look at either a chlorine injection or at the end of the year, do a shock treatment. Just make sure whatever you're applying is not gonna affect your root zone of what you got out in the field. So if you got tomatoes or something on the ground, make sure what you're applying, because you're directly in the root zone. Make sure you're doing what you can. Talk to your local PCA. We have suggestions to help clean our, it makes our lines right, but sometimes what we want to clean out with and what matches up with your product, what you have out in the field is not identical. So you want to make sure you have a nice balance. So again, where something like hydroperoxide works really well about eating up organic matter, and usually followed by a little bit of acid a day or so later, we'll punch out whatever didn't get punched out. So I kind of like the old school basics, but that's just me. Okay, production agriculture, which we're all. So what happens when maintenance is neglected? It's pretty simple. Your performance goes down. Your system uniformity goes down. Your yield goes down. Your revenue goes down. Your net profit goes down. I think that's it.
That's all tied to your sustainability.
It's tied to your sustainability. So, farmers are kind of the original, I like to think of it, and I might be wrong, and I've had some environmentalists argue with me, but we're the original environmentalists. We need, nothing we can do is without the environment. We have to have water, we have to have good soil, we have to have clean air. That makes our products better, that makes us go to market easier. So just remember, when you guys are out with maintenance, if you want to be a sustainable farm, which means you're still around next year or the year after that, or for your kids, that you have to make sure you're balancing everything. So it's real important to make sure we're doing that. So, and then we get to the other part of it, sustainability. If you're looking at going into the future here, when you're going to pull out and take your system out, there's lots of ways to recycle everything now. We've become a lot better about that. I mean, there's a lot more plastic out there. If you think of when we were putting stuff in the ground 25 years ago, you were doing it. Compared to now, how much more drip is out there, Matt? It's an incredible amount of drip. It's been really utilized on a lot of things. We want to make sure that we're going to use that stuff other places. So it's real important that we can actually recycle that and we have places to put it. And you're probably going to start seeing that show up more and more in the products you're going to be purchasing too, because we have to have a net zero. So resources you guys can look for. At netaffinusa.com. There's all sorts of downloads for maintenance. We have maintenance guides. We have the valve app. That's what the little icon looks like. If you want to look at that, there's also hydraulics on there that help you think about if you have the right valve in there. There's tech support teams. And then finally, there's the product management and field agronomy team, which is myself as a part of it, and Jonathan there in the back. If you guys have any questions, he's the local guy that runs around between Fresno up to Sacramento. So there's a lot of people they can have around here. Any other questions on maintenance? That's Pat.
Dominic, what kind of pressure difference for loss does that old sand make, like when it loses its angularity after a while?
It's a good question. So when your system first fires up, you should be losing about 1.5 to 2.5 PSI across it, right? As your system goes on, if you keep having to change your pressure differential up to if you're set at 7, so that we have about 5 pounds for it to work. If you're set at like 7 or 8 for it to back flush on, next thing you know, your guys are putting it at 10, 11, 12, because it just won't run that often because it's back flushing all the time. Then that's something you need to look at what your sand is. The 5 to 7 again is a rule. But if you're back flushing more often than every 3 hours or every 2.5 hours continuously, then you need to probably look at your sand or what you got going on. You could have dirtier water coming in. It could be that it was not, you might need another filter tank. A lot of us design this stuff on what we do on averages and estimations. And if you don't get a good water source, then sometimes you have to add a filter tank or something like that, or your incoming source has changed. So something of that nature to look at.
Today, I'm going to talk about, real-time information. And obviously this is a company that is kind of one of our water system companies. And really, I don't want to even talk much about it other than the fact that we do data capture, right? And we do automation. So next slide, please. Or this thing, does it work? So I wanted to get to the problem that we talked about, and everybody's been, Dominic, everybody's talking about distribution uniformity, right? No. And Which one?
The top one, top arrow.
Oh.
On the side.
On the side,
Yeah. It doesn't work.
try the bottom arrow. The one just below.
Can you just, I'll just say.
Going backwards.
So what I want to do is talk about distribution uniformity. And I loved, the example we got of how long does it take to get to San Francisco, right? Does anybody know what that is? It's an MPVI field or a picture, right? And it's just looking at crop stress, saying, hey, we're stressed. And the funny thing is, we think, well, there must be some variability in there, but at the end of the day, that's not variability, is it? It is in some sense. That's distribution uniformity, because this is where the submain goes, and this is the end of the drip line. Submain, drip line, both sides. That's how systems are designed. So I had my friends at the Earth Labs at Stanford break out this resolution. 53% of it is green, yellow, and orange and red. The red part, or the green part, is 43 acres. And I'm just assuming that 2,500 pounds are grown in that area. So if you took that 43 times 25 and you put $2 at it, 215,000, right, on that acre. At 21%, or 17 acres, it drops, as Tom said, 10%. And we're looking at 38,000 pounds, right, in that area. 13 acres at 2,000 pounds, because as I move out, right, there's less water. Water and crop go hand in hand. And then it's 52,000. And then my last spot, let's say 8.
Yes.
Yeah, I must have, oh, that's 8%, which is 7 acres. And I dropped it to 1,750, which puts me at 24,000. You total this up, right? In this block, it ends up being, let's see here. If I got 2,500 pounds on 80 acres, it'd be 200,000 pounds at $400,000. But because I had these drops in my production, it's 386,000, right? 368, excuse me, with a cost variance of 32,000 of what just uniformity does, right? So I think that's really important to note, because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about with distribution uniformity. To simplify it, it would be to say, well, right here in the green, I got 10 apples. Here in the yellow, I got 8 apples. Here in the orange, I got 6 apples. And in the red, I got 4 apples, right? So as that line goes down, the uniformity gets less, you have less crop, yes, less yield. So that's really important. What's most interesting about this is that the grower actually ran the pump off peak, which was the cheapest electricity time, right? So that's Friday afternoon till Monday at noon, right? 66 hours off peak. And so what happens is, how many other growers do you think run off peak? Everybody, right? What do you think happens to the groundwater during that off peak time? Well, I'm going to show you what happens, but at the end of the day, on a weekend, I watched groundwater with a transducer drop by 40 feet, right? And if groundwater drops 40 feet, it affects the efficiency or the design of your holes, your pump. So here's what happens. I'm going to ask somebody, how many guys got flow meters on their pumps? Everybody. Okay. And then with that flow meter, when you turn that pump on, you got a notebook. You write down how much water it's pumping. So in this situation, it's 1,200 gallons on Friday afternoon, right? What do you think happened on Saturday morning? Everybody's got the pump on. It's 1,000 gallons. right? Distribution uniformly starts to reduce, right? By Saturday night, we're down to whatever that is. Sunday morning, keeps going down. And by Monday at noon, I'm gonna be down to 800 gallons, right? Now, how many guys check their flow meters when they turn the pump off? You do? That's amazing.
Just for curiosity,
And do you see a variance?
maybe, depending on which wells, but say we got a couple that start at only 400. Shut off time, they're about 325, maybe 330.
Yeah. And where you start seeing that is in the flow meter, you watch the pressure reduce in the filters.
Yeah, because
All
you
those
guys start
things.
taking the gates down because your pressure on your tank start dropping. So,
That's right.
and they don't want to flush right.
But because we're not recording it and we don't get data on it, we actually don't know it, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about today is the ability to record information automatically, continuously, right? Every 15 minutes. And I'll give you an example. I'll go to the next slide. Because I'm a pump guy, you know. Everybody says, well, I got a pump test. It was, you know, it was this and it was this efficiency. But pump efficiency and well efficiency are typically, they're two different things. A pump efficiency is the wire to water efficiency based on OPE, which is operating efficiency, right? Well efficiency is how much water comes into the well, right? So if you've got water coming into a well, it's gauged by how much water per foot. It's called specific capacity, right? So specific capacity in most wells around here are about 30 gallons per foot, right? But let's use 50 as a number, right? So if I need 1,000 gallons, it's 50 gallons per foot. It's a 20-foot drawdown, right? Turn the pump on, get 1,000 gallons, draws down. When this happens, and over the weekend, what happens, you start seeing this depression happen. But that well efficiency is something that we don't get to see, right? Because specific capacity is the well efficiency. Wire to pump efficiency is pump efficiency. I know that's a little interesting, but it is important to know. Next slide. So what we see is in these wells is that, you know, it starts out here and it draws down to pumping water level. This is standing, right? Static water level. So this is the, what's it say here? The first 24 hours. Get the next 48 hours. And you can see this drawdown occur, right? But what's interesting is it just doesn't affect my yield. As this well draws down, there's perforations that allow water to go in here. So what happens is those wells basically go open, you know, they draw down past the perforations and they start to mineralize because, or biofoul. So mineralization is caused by this projection of line, right? So out here and coming in here down this way, the water comes in faster into the well. It's a little tiny point, you know, 0.6 slot. And as it enters the well, it creates an eddy just like in a dripper. And it starts to mineralize and actually the bicarbonates build up and plug the perforations. When that happens, when this drawdown occurs, this standing water up here, right? This whole area is hydrated, meaning it's wet. And as this cone is emptied, it's left open, right? Well, if you've got 10,000 pounds on both sides of a pipe and it's empty, what's going to happen? It's going to snap. And that's what happens. Wells break, and all those things occur, right? So the cost of yield is not just the problem, the cost of fixing this, right? But as this increases in depth, it's crossing all these aquifers, right? All these layers. It's picking up more sand. As it gets in here, what's sand do to a pump? It knocks it out. Knocks the bowl shaft out first, And once the bowl shaft's knocked out, it creates a vibration in the pump, goes up through the tube and shaft, takes out the tube and shaft, and now you have a problem. All because we don't understand where this pumping water level is on a 66-hour run, right? So when growers come to me and they talk to me about what do I got to do, I go, we have got to have a strategy where we only run this pump for 12 hours. Now, what happens is that when we go down with these transducers, right? I get to, that transducer reads where that water is every 15 minutes. It just takes off a little lid, turns into this, or some kind of platform, and says, this is what the water level is. When I turn the pump on, we can show that. But most important for us when we develop wells is that we actually get to see the recovery rate after we turn the pump off. And what that does for us in that recovery rate allows us to algorithmically calculate how efficient that well is going to be over 20 years. So that's every 15 minutes. But this is how we do pump testing, right? And when I do a pump test, this is a one-off, right? I stick this set of beads down the well. Now the question is, do I do it on Monday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning? What day should I do it? January, July, exactly.
Should do Saturday afternoon when everybody demands one.
It's absolutely,
Hold on.
but
You
what's
don't work Saturdays.
on Saturday? No, I do. I want to pump company for what happens is when I test these, depending on where the standing water level is, and you know what, most growers say, hey, I want to run it for like 24 hours before we do it. Nobody says, hey, I got to run it 66 hours before I do it, right? But the thing is it's a one-off, right? I get to measure this once. And if I'm lucky, guys will do it once a year. And some guys that are really on it, they'll say, let's do that twice a year, right? So one reading at one moment, twice a year. That device right here reads every 15 minutes and gives me 96 reads a day, right? 35,000 reads a year, right? Now, we all know what data points do, and that's resolution, right? So the question becomes, we keep wondering what we've got to do to be able to understand the groundwater, right? And this is the device we use, right? But at the end of the day, how I see groundwater in Madera County, the basin, so we did a nice job breaking state into 515 basins, but there's 8 distinct hydro regions in our basin, right? Each one has its own characteristic. We don't understand that. And so what happens is, with this information, we're able to start doing a lot more resolution and understanding wells. So when I tell somebody, hey, the water table dropped by 60 feet, and I go, come on. I don't know. I'm going to show you that in a second that says that. Maybe.
Matt,
Yeah.
this transducer, is there a data logger? What's a portable version to get a printout and go?
That's
Here's a 12 calendar month.
that is.
What does my well look like on this?
Yeah, when we set that up to do like when we develop wells, we'll leave this in and then we can watch the recovery every night, right? Because it's just reading it, it's taking out. And on well recovery, we look every minute. You start talking about like Ken Schmidt, he wants that resolution. Because again, when you see how well that recovery is, it's actually the strength of the aquifers that you're working with, right? So that recovery is a really important number, but there'll be times that I have to do this because sometimes those pumps are set at 800 feet and it's tough. We'll run a 1-inch line almost on anybody's well that we put in the last 5 years. And we'll have put a 1-inch PVC line in. But sooner or later, somebody's going to ask for that data. You guys did that.
We got one.
Yeah.
But we don't have the data logger there.
Yeah.
Is that an extra?
Well, On the two ranches, the Price and the other one,
Yeah,
there's a data logger sitting in a little box.
yeah, the yellow got one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, the,
And you know,
I've got some hours on the sounding unit, you know, I've sounded wells and
These.
I've lost so many beads.
There's the other thing, right? Yeah.
They're not cheap, but once a year.
Once a year.
I do it in January, I was in January, I just kind of turned out my own information, but, you know, it seems like well issues happen faster than in a year, right? So
Yeah.
it is okay in January, but then man, by August, like, whoa, what happened there?
Well, I'm gonna show you something. So people ask me all the time, and I'm glad I got to do this today because I'll always talk about a transducer like, what is that? So SCADA is sensory control. That's important to remember, sensory control, data acquisition. So I gotta get data all the time, right? It's actually how manufacturing is done, and we'll get into it, but it's really important. So in our automation, it allows us to automate, and it gives us a management software, remote on and off, irrigation decision port, we'll go through that, trend lines, alerts, pumping system, economics, we can run economics. We can tell you in real time, instead of giving you a one sheet on this pump test that you usually get, pump test it every 15 minutes, it reports the efficiency of that pump all the time, right? This is really important. Dom talked about maintenance and predictive maintenance. This is really important because in that drawdown, that's where these wells destruct, these bowls destruct, and where we lose our ability to have yield. We do a lot of work up north on some big pumps. So we're gauging PG&E's power because we know PG&E doesn't give people good power. Don talked about filter inlet outlet, right? Backwash events, flow, GPM day, monthly here. And then we've got a host of sensors. You can put in these systems, you can put any sensor you want, right? But soil moisture, flow, and pressure. We have a real-time DU, which I'll show you here in a minute. Next slide. That actually looks at that. So this is kind of what the gear looks like. Next one, maybe. Pump and monitoring, you see it at the filter station, flow meters, next. Crop monitoring, next. So what happens is your guy named Jenny went around the Chevy, Ford, Dodge, whatever, and said, hey, I got this idea, it's called continuous improvement, right? And continuous improvement, the Japanese called it Kaizen, and the company that picked it up was a company called Toyota. The thing we love about Toyota, Toyota has an inexpensive car that lasts really long and has a high resale value, right? It's because incrementally every day they got to see, you know, if that guy was doing something, they could make the correction, took a picture, it did some measurement and said, hey, you got to do it this way, right? But most people will just try to correct somebody and say, you got to stop doing that, and you go back the next day, and it doesn't happen, right? So this continuous improvement is really important. So the things that we get to see are, where's the active root zone? Where's the fertilizer ending up? What's the infiltration rate? All the things that are really critical for us as farmers. Next. So this is my ranch. And so I've been watching the water table for a long time in Madera County. And so, you know, 18 came, 16 happened and it rained, got a lot of water, and we saw the water table come up. Came out. 17, we got a freeze. Guys turned their pumps on in January. The whole water table reduced, right? 18 rolls around, get 160% of snowpack. 2 years is what we wait for, right? It's a 2-year cycle to get down the valley. And here it comes in the 2000s. We get at my house, which is a mile away from here, mile 2. Water table came back up to 200 feet. On July 3rd, where's my, is my line in there? I don't see the line. On July 3rd, the water level got down to 260. Water table at my home dropped 60 feet in a matter of 2 months, right? And everybody says, there's no way that can happen, right? Well, unless that transducer is not measuring right, then there is a way, right? It happened to be on July 3rd, and I imagine everybody was irrigated because it was plenty hot that day. But here's the irrigations. This is the amount of time. So the system picks up how long it irrigated, what it did, all those things, and then measures down in the well, and you get a snapshot of exactly what's going on. So I get pumping water level, and I get standing water. At these points right here, I've set an alert that says, hey, I'm in a critical spot. You better shut me off. It sends me a text. I hit the pump. I pull out my phone. I pull the app up. I hit it. Pump gets shut off right there. Right? Because what I don't want to do is tear up my well or my pump. So that's the data source.
Is
Next.
this also showing you what happens when there's district water available? I mean, but
Yeah,
pumps
it
are
does.
turning on, really.
Yes, absolutely. Go back to that, Mark. Thank you. Yeah. When we started seeing district water, guess what everybody did? They turned their pumps off, right? And guess what happened to the water table? It went back up. It's a good point. Thank you. Next. So everybody chuckles at me when I throw this up, right? It's a little graph. It's Google, right? And I'll say, well, this is what you do to, when you go to track your money, right? So I'll tell people, hey, if you got $1 million investment, how often do you look at this graph? If you got a $50 investment, how often do you look at it? Never. Once you get to $1 million, now let me ask, how many 40 acres are worth $1 million? Every? Right. So a 40-acre block is worth $1 million. And I guess if I was tracking the stock market, I'd be tracking what I was doing in my field too. Next. So it's about optimization, right? Real, water pump. These pumps now, we can look into a VFD. We can see exactly what the bearings are doing, what the magnetic pull is. These VFDs give us the ability to extract 250 different readings if we wanted to do it, right? But those are readings we don't even see, including vibration. So a pump will actually, long before you see it with your naked eye, it'll start a harmonic in it because it's starting to go out down low, right? So this system allows me to look exactly at what's going on that quick. Next. Back? Yeah. Sorry. So I think one of the things that Don talked about, we've talked about DU all day, right? One more. One more. Okay, now in between. There we go. So we heard about NRCS's soils maps, right? So you can grab this soils map, and this is the same soils map as this one, right? But what we did was we took out a EM38, which means that it goes down the field, picks up on the satellite and says, hey, you got a heavy area here, you got a light area here, right? Now, the map's kind of irrelevant until you pull 3-foot core samples and you start looking at them. But you can see how this core is thick and it's like a loam, right? So this is a loam area. And you can see how this thing's broke up and it's a sandy area, right? So we all talk about variability in the field. The thing we can't do is we can't set these fields up to match every little nuance, right? It'd be the craziest thing in the world. And I used to say unless we were growing weed, but weed doesn't even pay that well anymore. So next. So system uniformity, the most important thing. We could throw all these sensors away. We could do anything you wanted to, but if we have good system uniformity in our fields, we're going to win all day long. It's the most important thing anybody can do. And for us, it's the things that we talked about, 90% uniformity. Match the right emission device, right? I see all the time somebody, because emitters cost a little more if they're at a 48-inch spacing versus a 32 or whatever it is. But you gotta match the system, right? So in a sandy area or a sandy loam, makes sense if you put the emitter a little closer together. That way they all aggregate together. Put them farther apart, it just goes straight down, right? And then I see when they put them farther apart, it's usually 1 gallon versus a half gallon, right? And Dominic will tell you, well, half gallon plugs more often, Matt. And I say, well, anyway, but matching that emission device to your soil is critical. We back?
Yeah, pause for just a minute now.
All right.
Hang tight for a minute.
Everybody's gonna leave, Christina.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. This is not my technical issue. I'm just trying to fix the technical issue.
Yeah, you notice she went first. She went, I'm gonna get this guy to not tell the story.
I have a meeting that I'm currently missing. Yeah, she's helping us.
I know, I'm kidding.
You said that you got an alert like that July 30 was hot over 4th of July.
Yeah.
And they told that alert said that's time to shut your pump off. How long did you wait before, I mean, is there?
It buzzed me just like this.
Oh, when to?
Yeah, it goes
start?
to my phone. I look out, I pull the app up,
And it'll
and it just
say,
gets off, shuts the pump off. right
okay,
there.
but then to go back on, is it?
All I gotta do is watch that sensor and I can turn it back on whenever I want to.
Oh, I didn't know if there was a certain amount of time, if you were saying run 12 hours, if there was a certain amount of time when you would be off,
It's the right question.
so the water table, you control
You
how
get
much the water table is dropping?
Well,
Is it
I
12
did-
hours, or, I mean, every situation is different, but.
exactly, it's the San Francisco trip thing, right? It depends on where I'm at, how many growers in the area, and that's what breaks up these hydro regions, right? You start looking at these hydro regions, there's higher use, there's different use, there's all kinds of things that go on, and there's geologic stuff too. That's the right question is,
If enough growers did that, could we control the amount of the drop of the
Sure could.
water table?
sure could. You know what's funny, Dom? I mean, at the end of the day, what do you want?
I want
Yeah. No,
No, we
it costs too much.
When you put a system like this, that stays permanent.
Right.
So.
This thing.
Yes.
This thing right here, Dom, I look at everything that I do in ROI, right? You said it.
So what's your?
Well, here's my ROI. If I've replaced a pump in the last 2 years, right? And I'm worried about sand because I've got a cable to a well, and I'm in a high use water area, it pays for itself in about, I don't know. Just this piece is $7,000 with all the gear and everything lit up. It probably pay for itself. It's probably got a 3-month ROI on it. Yeah. Your old man, when I was with Pure Sands, right? I had an ROI of 3 months, right? I mean, ROI is everything that I've ever done. I'm a farmer, you know what I mean? Like I said, when you saw the first piece, I'm not here to pitch this. This is not what I'm pitching. What I'm telling you is what real-time data does for us.
So I'm asking,
Yeah.
there's always good information there.
Yeah,
Information is worth looking.
it is. Yeah.
What do you have, when you said I'm gonna shut off my pumps because I've got so much loss or too much drawing, what do you set that at?
I said it, so as a pump guy,
Your alert.
so what happens, let's just say in this well, that pump was at 320. I figure 40 foot of cover on a well takes the vibration out of it. Once I start dropping below 40 feet, 20 feet's probably pushing it. So my number would be probably 300 or 280 on the set for the critical alert, right? It sends a warning first. It goes, hey, by the way, you're 40 feet above critical. And then it's in a critical, then it says, shut, do you want to shut off? It doesn't ask you that. You set the targets, right? It's grower defined. Next. Again, the distribution. This is my field. This is one of my fields, right? So I got a Monterey valve and I got a nonpareil soil moisture. So we do real-time distribution uniformly, right? So these arrows right here are reading what the pressure is at the very farthest end of the field and allowing me to know that if my distribution uniformity is out of whack, right? Because we just talked about that yield side. We also, at the valves, there's a pressure, you know, and then there's a pressure at the filter. And then, like you said, Mark, there's flow, right? So we get to see all those things. What's interesting, and it's a phenomenon that's happened twice now. Nonpareils are a bigger tree. So my Monterey's were at 3640 this year, and nonpareils came in at 32. If I can pour enough water to the nonpareil, I can hit 36, 38 all day long. I used 56 inches of water in this year's irrigation. And then I got well pump monitoring filters at this site and this site. This site has a direct drive, which means it just runs at 1 RPM. This is a VFD, so when these valves come on, the system can come up and go down as it needs to. Next. So understanding the irrigation dynamics. I call this, you know, we heard it today, you know, I think Dom said, where's that zone, whether it be for grapes, almonds, tomatoes, whatever it is, but I call it an active root zone, right? It's this target right here. So if I'm in a sandy loam and the infiltration rate's two inches per hour, right? In order for me to land my fertilizer and everything, 2 inches at 12 gives me 6 hours, right? And then once I'm out of my active root zone, or once I'm pushing into it, and it's at 24, I go 2 times 24 is 12. I'll shut that fertilizer off at 10 hours. So I started at 6 hours, running for 10 hours, and all along, I know that I'm delivering fertilizer right where it needs to be, right? This probe actually is pretty amazing because it actually the blues look at EC, electroconductivity, right? And temperature. So this is my target. What I love about these probes is that they sit right in the ground. And instead of having these little one-offs that are 12 inches, 24 inches, 32 inches, or whatever they are, you put this in and everything that you do reads in. So we call them full profile probes. And they allow us to look every time and get really high quality, consistent data. Next. Critical, the active root zone. I can cut my nitrogen cost or my fertilizer cost by 50% just knowing where to land it. Next. Again, continuous, real-time, critical stuff. Next. This is all the things that we talked about. You know, we heard today, you know, loams, sand, you know, so it's okay, you can keep going. Saturation point, will point, just stay between the lines, right? What we do is we set a high, we set a low, just drive the car down the road. Right? Does that make sense? I let that system run and it just fits into that curve. What's interesting about it is before we ever started doing this, when we grew Thompson's, I had this ebb and flow in yield, right? Some years we'd have 8 tons, some years we'd have 11. When we started putting these probes in, I predicted could recreate my yield within about 10%, and we were hanging about 12 to 14 tons all day long because we knew where our success was, right? So, and you can see the distance, you know, in between. Here's where we hit an irrigation. But what's interesting is this is the first foot, second foot, third, fourth, and fifth, right? So sometimes you'll see these lines won't even get affected, right? And that has, you know, an effect in your strategy. Yep, next. So different methods, right? Anybody use this before? Yeah. And you better have easy going soil because this is the last sensor, right? You can see me bent over here. Wearing the same shirt. That's 5 feet, right? But what the problem is this, and what got me to do this, was my dad used to force me to do this once a week in 12 blocks, right? And I said, there gotta be a different way in life to do it than to do this, right? But I would be willing to bet that most people don't even do this once per year, right? But the only way to gauge this probe and to set it properly is to go old school and then match this probe with what you're feeling in that area. So once we put these in, we do the ground truthing and we go old school. You can see right here, that's a 1/4 inch root and I'm back off the tree, right? So those are all the things that we know. Next. So these are the different tools that we've seen. You've got Decagon, Irrigation. This is a, what's that, Priscilla? That's a watermark, but it's a gypsum block. But all devices that are good, these right here are not good in clay soil. I won't even get into that. Next. So again, you can see these different points. What I love about this probe and what I learned early was that when I dug that single hole, the most important thing is that when you're irrigating, this has to be secured, right? Because if the water runs down and runs down the probe, there's a problem. But when you put these devices in, right? And this device is at, go back. Sorry. You put this device in, this, you'd have to put, you have to put 4 of these in at different depths, right? You'd have to read it. But what happens is that when you do that, you have to make sure that you seal up that area around there because it's called preferential pathway, right? When water runs down and you get preferential pathway in these probes, they're ineffective. Next. Again, you can see how this matches up, right? You got 1 foot, 2 foot, 3, 4. There's the events. There's a pressure transducer on the drip line. Told me how long it ran. No. Okay. Next. Infiltration lag. Depth of irrigation. Next. Next. Ooh, see, Tommy? Next. All right. Next year's crop starts with today's irrigation. Water efficiency, super important right now. Most important thing that we do. Pump and well efficiency, critical. Targeted and timed fertilizers. And then, you know, this obviously the systems are tied to weather, frost, in and out of canopy, you know, for humidity, whatever you want to gather data and you think is relevant, these SCADA systems will hook right up to them. Next. So I love ET because what I do is I run a budget weekly. I know how many hours I'm going to run in my mind, right? So I just plan out my whole year from last year, or I take 10 years of CIMAS data. I calculate what that looks like. And then I say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, right? And then I know during these times, May, June, I got nut fill, super important. I got hole split, I got to drop this on. And then I got a regen. And those things are really important, you know, to have that. So that's how the Australians use evapotranspiration equations. They use them to do a budget, and they use soil moisture to track exactly what they're doing. Okay, to refine it. Next. Again, simple little tool. When should we fertilize? What type of fertilizer? What are we doing? Those things, right? I mean, nitrogen, when we talk about nitrogen, nitrogen might go into the ground and stay in front of the water. It's so conductive, you know, it doesn't hang on to anything, right? Whereas zinc grabs onto everything. So you just got to think about how those look like as to what you're injecting. Next. I think Christina might have done one somewhere. Any questions? You know, wound up. I haven't done this like in about, I don't know, 10 years or something. What's that? Yeah, yeah, you know, you can buy this gear from in situ, you can just look at it if you want, I'll give you the website. And they send you this reel, you know, we just happen to have this so we're tied down, but they'll send the reel, everything's already done. And you gotta, instead of using this, we bought this like 10 years ago, you can just use your phone now. You know, you got it out, it hooks right up to the data. In fact, while you're doing it, this thing, this sensor will actually store all the data for like a week. So you actually don't have to download it while you're doing it. It just, every 15 minutes it takes a week. And that's what makes it nice. So I got this crazy thing, you know, I believe you got a map, you got to measure, you got to monitor, and then you got to manage, right? And these are the things that we do: flowering, fruit set. This is a really important part, you know, of people that have a regulated deficit. Guys that are growing high-end grapes, you know, they'll throw these grapes into an RDI, a regulated deficit, to keep the berries small. Because if you keep the berries small, the skin thickens. That's where all the phenolics or the acids are. And it's really important. So what they do is they'll almost take the water out until veraison, and then put the water back in and get tonnage, you know, on the other side. The Australians mastered that. Next. So we saw this today. You know, Thule throws stuff out here. Thule looked at a company that we were doing some work for. It was a French company called Ventel. And what they did was they set these barriers, right? So greens, maybe too much. Orange is a decent level. Red, you probably need to push. But you can see in these strategies, if you set these predetermined lines, now all of a sudden you get to, like, let's just say that this is nut fill right here. And then I want to go into hole split, and I drop down here, right? I got to look right down in there. And when I do that, I hate doing pressure bombs. Anybody ever do a pressure bomb? You know, like, and it's where it's called stim potential. You got to put it in a little chamber. You got to do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's got to be consistent. It's got to be on the same branch. Blah blah blah. Right? But stim potential is how all the UC researchers have ever done any of their work. So if you're going to gauge what you're doing and you want to follow their protocol, you have to do stim potential, and then you match it to something like a soil moisture or EDP so that you can run with it. Okay? So it's funny because, you know, I think sometimes there's, you know, we as growers, you can grow a 2,200 pound crop and use 32 inches of water, right? And still be a high resource operator, right? If you don't owe any money on your land. But this line right here is called a smatter graph, a smatter chart. And what it does is it weighs in on how many pounds you've used and then how much fertilizer and water. You can't see that down there. And as long as you're on this side of the line, I call those guys high efficiency resource operators are a hero, right? So no matter where you fit, as long as you're using your resources at their highest level, I think that's the most important thing we can do. Everybody has their own way of doing business. Next. Next. And I think that's it. Yeah. Okay.